This is the request. That request approved by the mayor and council. It goes into the resolution, but the mayor and the council will eventually have to approve an ordinance. Yes, they put it into the ordinance. Okay, so it's really, you ready? I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. This is a workshop meeting. Now it's going to be a regular meeting, May 29th at 7 p.m. Steve, can you take the roll, please?
Mayor Galise.
Here.
Mr. Gasparini.
Here.
Councilman LaForgia.
Here.
Mr. Waldron.
Here.
Mr. Spila.
Here.
Mr. Pereno.
Here.
Mr. Palafonte.
Here.
Mr. Dutcher.
Here.
Chairman Cafone.
Here. Can everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate notice of this meeting, time and place was posted in the lobby of the municipal building, delivered to the Star Ledger and the Progress newspaper. No applicant will be heard after 11 p.m. The first order of business would be for approval of the minutes. I have approval of the minutes that are in our packet from April 23rd, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Mayor Galise.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Pereno.
Aye.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Cafone.
Aye. Under old business, we're going to call up applicant 4-2019-5
Excuse me,
Kingsbridge.
Mr. Chairman, I just had one correction on the minutes.
I took care of it.
Oh, you took care of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the where it said chairman as opposed to
Yes.
council.
Okay,
Yeah, that
thank
was
you.
taken care of. Under old business, we're going to call up applicant 4-2019-5 Kingsbridge Office Park LLC, 6710 Kingsbridge Road, 264 Passaic Avenue, Block 2301, Lot 2. Okay, this is carried from April of 2023. Before we start, can I just remind everybody that when the mics are green lit, that means they're hot, so be mindful when you're talking and remember to put it on when you do want to talk. Good evening, Mr. LaParry.
Excuse me. Good evening, Michael LaParry. I'm a partner with the law firm Mandelbaum Barrett. I'm counsel to the applicant, Kingsbridge Office Park LLC. We're here again on a continuation from last month and a couple months prior for our site plan application for a 39-unit residential apartment building, age restricted on a mixed-use site. Just some housekeeping before we move forward. I know Mr. Gasparini, and I'm sure if there are any other members that weren't at the last hearing, I don't know if you listened to the tapes and certified that you're eligible to vote.
Mr. LaParry, I watched the entire meeting while I was flying back on an airplane on YouTube, and then I watched it again here.
That's ambitious.
Dedication.
Okay, well, thank you. I think, was that the only other member that wasn't available?
Is there any other board member that wasn't at the meeting on April 23rd?
No, I was there, but I think I missed one of the meeting.
Did you listen to the tape?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
at the last meeting.
We have alternates?
And
You weren't here. So we have Mr. Dutcher, who's eligible, Mr. Spiel, who's eligible, myself is eligible,
I am.
the mayor is eligible, the councilman and Jimmy Gasparini is eligible.
Mr. Waldron is not eligible.
Mr. Waldron is not eligible.
Okay, thank you. So, if you will recall, and I'm sure you do, at the conclusion of the last hearing, we had discussed a few changes that we were going to make to our plans again to further clarify some of the parking concerns that were raised by the board. We did that. We submitted them a couple of weeks back. The board should have everything, and we are going to testify tonight about those changes. So unless there's any other questions, I'll call my first witness. Thank you. My first witness is Mike Lanzafama. He's a professional engineer with Casey and Keller. He was previously sworn, and he will acknowledge when he gets up here that he remains under oath.
Could I make a suggestion, if, Mr. Lanzafame, if you're gonna testify by your exhibits, can you put it right next to your microphone so we could pick it up? Sure. Thank you.
TVs aren't working. I think he's putting it on.
My name is Michael Lanzafama. That's Lanzafama, with the firm of Casey and Keller Incorporated, 258 Main Street, Millburn, New Jersey. And I acknowledge I'm still under oath from the last meeting.
And all your licenses are full force and effect as well?
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Lanzafama, you prepared and submitted a revised set of plans since the last hearing. Can you please walk the board through some of the changes that we made since last hearing?
Sure. Some of the changes we made were primarily around Building 10, which is on the eastern end of the project, the southeastern corner of the project. What
Counsel,
we
would you-
had done is
What-
we...
That's the newly submitted one, correct?
Yes, this has a date of May 7th, 2024. We've added some color to it, as we have in the past, just to help clarify the difference between buildings and parking areas and green space.
Just give me 1 second.
Mike, is that,
We submitted this plan, we just added color. Do you want me to mark it as?
I think you
yeah,
should, yes.
so I could
What-
reference
What's
it.
the,
It's A12, I believe.
Yep.
Is it the parking allocation exhibit? One or the other? No, it's a site plan? Oh, okay.
That one's just color. A12.
A12, please.
so what I've marked as Exhibit A12 is the overall site plan. Sheet number 4 in the plan set, we've added color to it, as I said earlier, to help clarify the location of the buildings and parking areas. At the last hearing, one of the issues that was of primary concern to the board and to the fire department was the fact that the area along the eastern side of building number 10 did not have adequate roadway width. The driveway aisle, I believe we had it at a one-way driveway at 15 or 18 feet, and the fire department felt that they needed a minimum of 20 feet to get their apparatus around the building in an efficient manner. So what we did is we took that driveway area, eliminated the parallel parking that was on the north side of that driveway, and put in perpendicular parking along the eastern side of the building. If you may recall in prior designs and prior applications, we had a similar arrangement that were taken out at some point because we felt that we didn't need them at that time. So we've added those spaces, and to provide for adequate backup for those parking areas, we've provided a 24-foot aisle as prescribed by your ordinance. And then we took the area that is between the parking areas and traverses to the rear or the south end of the building, and we made that 20 feet wide to provide the adequate width that the fire department needed. Mr. Berry, in his review memo, pointed out that within your ordinance, a two-way driveway has to be a minimum of 24 feet. We would either make that a one-way driveway, or we can keep it the two-way driveway, request the variance. We think that is a pretty straightforward C2 variance where the benefits of having less impervious area in an area that is really not necessary to be 24 feet wide, because 20 feet is more than adequate for two-way traffic movement. And it gives the fire department what they were looking for in the way of adequate room for them to set up their apparatus and maneuver through that area. We did receive a new memo from the fire department, which I believe indicated that they were fairly satisfied with what we've done. I believe they were satisfied with what we had done. They had one minor comment about the weight of the vehicle that we indicated on our truck turning analysis. This was the information provided to us by the township, but he corrected us. I think we had indicated a 75,000-pound vehicle. It's actually an 80,500-pound vehicle. So other than that, that was the only little change to the, not change, but correction to the plan. In addition to that modification, we just took a look at some of the parking. We did some rearranging of a few of the parking spaces between the two buildings so that we can be sure that we have an appropriate amount of parking at each building for their various uses. The net result is that we still have 348 parking spaces provided, and that's not going to change as part of this overall design. There was a very slight increase in impervious coverage as a result of the modifications to the parking area on the east side of building number 10. So we're currently at 62.82%, where the ordinance permits 45%. We had been granted a variance under prior approvals for as much as 62.86%. So we're a little bit less than what prior approvals were, but we're a little bit more than what was our last submission at the prior hearing. In addition to the variance associated with the width of the drive aisle, the parking spaces that we're proposing are 9 by 18 stalls, which is pretty much what we've applied throughout the center. As you know, your ordinance requires 10 by 20. We had been granted that variance on every other application that we had before the board. In addition, the parking spaces, as you can see, are closer than 10 feet to the building. I believe that they're 2 feet at the corner and 4 feet along the east side of the building. Again, we had been granted that variance under prior applications, but we would respectfully request that variance. Again, we feel that there is adequate room in that area for those vehicles to park and still have sufficient separation. That area of the building, the side of the building, has enough separation. There are pretty much blank walls in that area. As you know, the lower level of building 10 is the car loft storage facility, so it's not like there's someone sitting in their office chair looking out a window at parking. So it's, in my mind, it's an appropriate way to provide sufficient parking and at the same time keep separation and provide for adequate circulation. What we also did as a result of the last hearing and some back and forth with Mr. Keller regarding allocation of parking. We did prepare another exhibit, which we had submitted to the board, and then I believe we submitted an enhanced or expanded version of that plan at Mr. Berry's request. The initial submission for the allocation plan focused on buildings 8 and 10. And Mr. Berry thought that it would be more beneficial to the board if we included the entire park. So we prepared another exhibit. Put that up on the easel.
So, Mr. Lonzafame, this was submitted in advance of the hearing to the board. I think everyone has it, but maybe out of an abundance of caution, we could just mark this as an exhibit.
A13.
Yes, please. And if you could just identify it again for the record.
What has been marked as A13 is an exhibit entitled Parking Allocation Exhibit. And what this represents is a way in which,
Mike, real quick, what's the date on this?
oh, I'm sorry, it was last revised May 17th, 2024. Yeah. Eric, do you have the latest one? Yeah, you did, okay, because your report didn't have it yet. So what we've done is, this is, let me make something very clear. This is not a parking assignment plan. It's a parking allocation plan. And by that I mean, what we tried to demonstrate in this plan is how people might park relative to their workspace, as well as where they might live within the development. So, and what we did is we tried to color code it so that it would be a little more helpful for the board as well as the reviewers to understand what we were trying to accomplish in this exhibit. And if you look at the exhibit, I guess the key elements here are the green, which represents the available parking for the new building, the senior housing building, the 36 units that we're proposing to be constructed as part of this application. The yellow parking is a parking associated with the commercial use within Building 10. The purple spaces represent parking that is available to the building, what we call Building 8, 8 Kingsbridge Road, which is also a multifamily apartment building. And then we had some other spaces in pink, which are associated with 6 Kingsbridge Road and the various uses within Kingsbridge. The blue for 7 Kingsbridge Road on the north side of Kingsbridge Road. And finally, 264 Passaic Avenue, which is a commercial building, as well as the original apartment building. You could see the brown or tan parking spaces are associated with that building. And what we tried to show the board is that we feel that there is adequate parking in close proximity to each building, despite in Mr. Keller's report, he kind of indicated or implied that it would be a long walk for people to get to their home and get to their place of business. You can see that we have sidewalks available all along the roadway. Granted, the main lobby entrance is on the south side of our Building 10A, which we're referring to it as. But there's also entrances on the north side that can be accessed by the tenants or visitors, as well as we have parking garages that are directly accessible into the building. So we don't feel that there is an excessive distance that people might have to walk to get to their location. We think we have a good mix of conventional parking spaces, EV charging, and handicap accessible spaces. so that we feel that the numbers we're proposing are adequate and serve the needs of both the residents as well as the people that work at this location. One of the points I'd like to make in doing this analysis and looking at the plan and trying to understand how we went from a project that the board felt had more than adequate parking because they granted us a variance at one point, to a point where they feel that it's totally insufficient and there's totally inadequate parking. So one of the things I looked at was, so how many cars did we actually displace to build this building, which I think is an important element. Mr. Keller indicated that there would be a net loss of 45. I don't believe that number is correct. I think it's more like 31 spaces because we added in some additional parking around the building, as well as still provided for the garage spaces. So I believe my math was there were 31 spaces lost as a result of the new building, and then you have this parking demand for the new building of 44 spaces. So you have a swing of 75 spaces. But every time any type of survey was done of the property by either Mr. Dean or Mr. Keller's office, there was always a surplus of numbers much, much greater than that. According to Mr. Keller's report on April 9th, he had 182 available spaces. On May 8th, he had 203 available spaces. On May 9th, 214 available spaces. So, in my opinion, I believe that this relationship of residential to commercial allows a lot of flexibility with regard to strict compliance of the ordinance. I don't think when we have a mixed use like this, and I think even your ordinance talks to this, that you don't just simply add up the numbers and say, boom, that's what you need to have. I think you have to look at a shared parking analysis, and I think Mr. Dean has done that, and I think he'll testify more about that after I'm done. And as I said, I think, again, we have more than adequate parking based upon my understanding of how the site functions, my experience with the site over the years from, actually, I'm dating myself from the initial inception. My firm did this subdivision way back in the 70s, and I laid out most of these buildings. So I truly have been with this project and this site since its inception. So in any event, I think that kind of summarizes, and I hope I addressed some of the concerns the board had at the last meeting and provided you with some additional information that can help you understand the project and give us a favorable vote.
Mr. Lanzafame, the only other question I have for you is, you did receive and review the Traffic Safety Bureau report dated 5/16/2024?
Yes.
And it indicated that there were no traffic concerns or issues?
That's
raised with the
correct.
new plan?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Lanzafame, I have a question. You had said that the parking for the residential units are within close proximity of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said that the parking is not assigned, these are just allocations.
Correct.
So if the parking's not assigned, if I were to live there, I could come home and not be able to park near my building, correct?
But that hasn't been the experience. The experience that we've seen in the times that the site was surveyed and parking counts were made, there always seemed to be available parking for everyone. The only signs that are up are under the buildings, under the building at 264, for example. There's a sign that says residence parking, kind of implying that if you're a commercial tenant, maybe you shouldn't park under there.
Okay, but if I'm a resident
Mhm.
and I want to park under this building, and I come home and there's no parking spaces because I believe the numbers for this building, there's not enough parking spaces if, there's, how many units? I'm sorry.
In this building?
Yeah, here we are, okay.
Yeah.
264, you have 36 units, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if I'm married, and I have a two-bedroom, and I come home, and the other 35 units have a parking space, me or my spouse
Mhm.
have to wander through the area to look for a spot.
Well, first of all, this is senior, we're talking about the new
No,
building.
I'm talking about, I'm
which
just talking about
building?
264 right now.
Oh, 264.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
or
sorry.
anyone, any one of these that I pull into.
Okay.
Apparently, the way this chart looks to me is there's a spot for each apartment, but if it's a husband and wife or a two-bedroom apartment,
Mm-hmm. No, I get you.
so,
Yeah, so even if someone has to park out in the parking field here or even along the back, that's still not an excessive distance for people to walk. I don't believe your ordinance has a restriction or a limitation on how far parking has to be from an entrance to a building. You know, we're used to walking, some of us are, to get to a mall, to get to a shopping center, to get to any public space. Very often you have to make long walks. And I don't think this is that unusual.
no?
I don't, I really don't.
Okay, I tend to differ.
Question, Chairman? Mr. Lonzafama, according to, again, your color code here, you have the spaces along the back in yellow, 43 to 50, allocated. Again, they're allocated, I understand that. There's nothing to stop any of those people, if they choose, to park in green spaces 1 through 8, correct?
That's correct.
So therefore, again, along to what Jim was saying, those spaces are now occupied. The resident of that building would now have to park across a two-lane street and get to their apartment. As would, I'm supposing, spaces 23 through 29 to get to their apartment have to cross another two-lane street to get to
But
theirs.
these are two-lane driveways.
Okay.
Any project.
But we're also
any-
talking about senior, 55 and older people getting this walking distance, carrying maybe a bag.
But they're not excessive distances.
Again, it's a matter of opinion.
It is.
As we said the last time.
Yes, we're
You'd like
up there.
to walk a half a mile, I'll take the car.
So, Mr. Lanzafama, in the last meeting, we had spoken about a location for the tractor trailers to drop off the cars for the car loft.
Correct.
Is there any way you could address that here, where we?
Sure. You know, we talked to the people at the car loft about their operation. We had a conversation with the police department as well. And it was determined that probably the best way to handle that is to allow them to offload along, parallel park along Kingsbridge Road.
But they're,
makes the
under
most
the,
sense.
under the zoning ordinance, they're not allowed to, right?
But it's not a loading
the
area, it's
resolution.
only, it's a temporary drop-off area.
But they're not
and it's
supposed to,
gonna
be under that, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, counsel, I think that
Well, then-
resolution, you couldn't, tractor, you had to drive your car there, park it outside, and then someone from the loft would go in and pull it in.
Well, I think we're combining two different things right now. The drop-off of driving the car there, that was just a matter of operations as to how the cars got into the building. That continues to be the case. Whether or not a car comes by a carrier is a different issue, a different question, and a different scenario.
But that's not, you agree that that's not allowed?
Pursuant to what?
The resolution,
No, it was,
There was no, I don't believe there was any resolution that restricted car carriers from dropping a car off. What the resolution stated was that the cars would be parked or driven into the building by employees so that you didn't have you know, I guess random car owners driving into buildings.
But you realize we have an ordinance that states that if you're a warehouse, no matter what you're warehousing, cars, product, you need to have a loading dock. You're aware that there's an ordinance indicating that.
Yeah, we have loading areas. We have a designated loading area in the back of the building, but
That's not
can it
where the cars get
accommodate?
loaded. The cars get loaded on the apartment side through the garage.
Correct. The
They
cars
don't get
come in.
loaded in the back of the building.
They'll
Right, so
come in.
that has happened, we understand, it was pointed out to us. But we are not asking for a variance for the loading docks, we have the
I
loading
think
docks.
maybe you should ask for a variance for the loading dock because it's required.
Well, we have a loading dock. That's the point.
It's
We
not
have a loading
sufficient
dock.
for for your operation though, because it's not being used in that manner. And the loading dock has been there and you have never used to load or unload it. You've done it off the municipal street when we have 90 units back in behind Cambridge.
Right, and we could discuss that further with additional witnesses, but again, that's,
All right, so I'm gonna point you to the resolution. It's on page 4. It's the approved February 5th, 19. And it states that the Mr. Treventor, which was your client who was sworn, testified that customers would drive their cars to facility, but that only his employees would be permitted to drive the cars inside.
correct.
So
Only the
it-
employees would be permitted to drive the cars inside. I think you're latching on to words that,
No, where it says that only, so,
yeah, I
the
believe,
customers
yeah.
would drive their cars. Unless the customer would drive a
To the location.
carrier?
I think you're being too literal with your interpretation of your reading of that resolution.
No, that's the
question-
testimony of your client.
Yeah, no, the testimony was that, how do the cars get in the building? And he says, when the customers bring the cars to the building, they get out, the employees load them. There was no restriction on whether or not a car can come by a truck. People don't drive exotic cars from California to New Jersey in order to store them here. They get taken on car carriers.
And I agree with you.
Right.
They need to unload and offload, not on the municipal street. I
Well,
agree they don't drive those cars, but you need to provide an area for them to offload and unload exotic cars.
right, and in the off chance that there's a carrier, we can make alternative provisions if this board says that they can't unload at this
We made that
location.
provision in this,
Okay,
we were
and
told
we'll-
it
and
wasn't going to happen.
We could have them unloaded at a separate location and have them not have
Another
a
municipal street or
No.
on someone else's property.
on someone else's property. We can make arrangements. If they can't be accommodated at this site, we can make
And
arrangements.
they're gonna need a variance, no, to offload and unload cars to bring them to somewhere else.
If that's the case, we'll ask for the variance.
Okay, and then, and again, going back to the resolution, I apologize, but under the wherewithals of the further resolved, number 6, the applicant shall be bound by all exhibits introduced, all representations made, and the testimony given before the board at its meeting of February 5th, 2019. So if that's a representation made, which is in the resolution, I would think that he'd be bound by
Well,
that.
again, I think you're being too literal with your reading. The chairman agreed that that's not necessarily how it's read or how it's intended. And I think
He's
you're being
chairman
too
of the
literal.
planning board.
That's correct.
This is a zoning board resolution.
That's correct, and we're before the planning board, so I believe the chairman has the ability to make a decision, not the board attorney.
I think I kind of made a decision. I think we need to have a loading area for the exotic cars.
Okay.
and
I
unloading.
understand, they also have to be loaded off-site. I believe that what your position was that you don't want them loaded on the street.
Not with all the apartment buildings in the back and all the.
Understood.
I've gone there on Sundays. I was there last night just to take a look around, so I have clarity on what I'm deciding here. And I see that you have tractor trailers there on the site. In the back, you have trailers, trailer cars. I don't know, what they're there for, if they're not unloading and loading a car, but the trailer's there. There's other businesses and trucks that are in the blue area here by Building 7. I think what you're telling us on paper is not what's really happening on the property.
Mr. Chairman, I
There's
have
no
a- I have
way
a-
anybody could use number 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 23, or 25 as parking.
Mr. Chairman,
There's two tractor trailers there.
if I may, I was present for those hearings. There was no real detailed discussion about tractor trailers. It was always an individual dropping off the vehicles. We could revisit the minutes and the tapes, but that was my recollection, was mostly owners would bring their cars there and they would valet them in. There was no discussion or design for tractor trailer drop-offs or pickups. Otherwise, the Board of Adjustment would have addressed that somehow, in my opinion.
And that's reflected in the resolution.
That's my understanding,
It
yes.
is.
Yeah, yeah, that's why it was written the way it was.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask a question. Mr. Lanzafame, are there any provisions for guest parking here?
It's all worked into the overall scheme of plans.
So
When you determine the required number of parking spaces, there's a factor built into that to determine enough parking for visitors.
So if you allocate each space to each apartment, where would the guest parking be?
They would be intermingled.
With
It's not that
everyone being
You're
present?
assuming that everybody would be home at the same time and everybody would
Well,
be working at the same time. And that's the whole point of a shared parking concept, because that doesn't happen. In reality, it doesn't happen. And what we haven't taken into account at all is the 18 parking spaces along Kingsbridge Road that have a 1-hour parking limit that could easily be used by visitors or guests,
Except at night.
except at night.
Steve, in previous meetings, did we have banked parking spots anywhere on this property?
In previous approvals or previous
approval.
submissions?
Previous
On this
approval.
application, no, but prior various, as you know, this application has gone through many iterations.
Right.
So at various prior approvals did require bank parking.
Are they still existing?
Some of them.
Are the bank spots still existing in this?
As
They're
presented,
being
there's no
utilized.
bank parking. They're
There's no
all
bank
built.
parking any longer. They're now being utilized.
So when the bank parking spots need to be utilized, do they need to come back to the planning board to show cause to use the bank parking spaces?
In the resolution, typically, it would say return to the planning board.
If that were the condition.
If that was a condition,
imposed.
they've been back several times, not for bank parking, but for, additional or additional development, subsequent to those spaces being banked.
They essentially were erased as the site developed. They were utilized.
Right. So now, right, Mike, you can confirm,
Still on the
they've all been built. There's no area of bank parking that
That is correct.
being proposed.
Is
So
there a
this-
resolution where they had come back and asked to use the bank parking spots?
Specifically for that, no, I don't recall that, but they had come back for additional, in a new development scenario. Like for instance, presenting a new apartment building, I think once had followed it. One point, I know there was a bank parking for what was proposed in office, where there is now an apartment building. So it wasn't specific to that, but it was a new development scenario. But there was in the resolution, I believe, there's bank parking for a Board of Adjustment resolution.
So Mike, between 13 and 20, the yellow spots, there's an overhead door there. How far is the overhead door from the car that would be parked there? Yeah, around number 17 and 16, there's an overhead door to the building. I'm sorry, the yellow parking. That would be all the way to the
Left.
North.
Yeah, the left. Right there.
The store is not active, that's part of the, it's been from, when the building was originally built, it's no longer active.
Is it operational?
No.
How come they didn't
Wait,
say-
wait, How about
Is it-
this, I know, but how about the one that's over by 25 and 26? Is there one there?
Of the yellow spaces?
Yeah. On the building, is there an overhead door?
That's the south, east corner of the parking area. There's a loading, bay right there.
That's a loading bay.
And this is a 24-foot wide aisle.
I have a question, going back to the spaces along 31 through 39. I believe you might be indicating some electric charges there?
What color,
Or
Mike?
pink, or purple, whatever,
Building 8,
building 8,
the left bank.
right by the ruler, right by your ruler.
Yeah, right in through here. The green one, you mean?
Pink, 31 through 39.
31 through 39. That's under the building, yes.
They're not allowed to be under the building by ordinance.
They're not electric. Yeah, go back to the site plan.
I think on sheet 4 they are.
These that are under the building predated your ordinance. Remember, your ordinance came into effect. We had electric charging stations and parking in place and approved by the planning board. And then this new ordinance came in that said you couldn't park under the building. So those predated and are grandfathered in our opinion.
I don't know. Paul, that we did that for fire safety.
You'd have to talk to the fire department here. I'm not too sure. I know they had asked for fire extinguishers and shut-offs and other things like that by the EV stations. Any other questions from the board?
I got a couple.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lanzafama, how are you?
I'm well, Eric. How are you doing?
Good.
Mr. Keller, excuse me.
Mike. A question, and I won't get too far into parking and things like that.
Sure.
I'll keep it to the civil side.
Thank you. Keep it civil.
Yes, that too. How does this allocation, well, let me back up. What is your understanding of reserved parking spaces on site today? Where do they exist? Who are they for? And so on.
But you say reserved? Did you say reserved?
Reserved, yes.
Reserved.
Restricted,
Restricted.
assigned.
I don't, there's, as far as I know, I believe there's only a few. And that was because, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the apartment building at 264 Passaic Avenue, a couple of tenants specifically requested certain spots close to the entrance of the building, and they were granted that. But other than that, it's maybe a handful, maybe 4 or 5.
So I thought there was testimony at the last meeting that each of the apartments on the site today were assigned a parking space.
They're not assigned, they're not given a specific parking spot.
So
They're
it's
told that they have at least one
Mr.
parking.
Gasparini asked, they are what they are, that
Correct.
you get first come, first serve.
Yes.
So if that means you have to park on the other side of, and I'm just being,
You're trying
on
to, the worst case scenario.
right, you have
So-
to park on the far side or behind Building 6 and walk over to the 264 building. That is the way it works.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, the resolution for the residential building on 264 Passaic, which was application 4-2019, which was memorialized in October of 2019. One of the statements was that each apartment will have one space designated for its exclusive use. So that's not being done?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right, so the residential, there's only, from our parking investigations, it was our understanding from what we saw out there, from what my staff member looked at, those spaces were marked as, they were numbered. Let me put
Yeah,
it that way.
correct,
They were
correct.
numbered.
Mr. Tremator had advised me that, I asked him the same question, why were they numbered? He said originally the intent was to provide one spot for each apartment. They would number them, and then there would be additional rent incurred as part of that. That turned out not to be a good business move. Most people did not want to pay additional for the parking spot under the building. So they decided not to do that, but the parking spaces were still numbered.
Okay. So at this point, so it was not, it was a business decision, a decision of the operator as to how to utilize those spaces.
That is correct.
Okay. Are there other reserved spaces, putting aside the residential, for the commercial uses? I'm
Not-
sorry.
To be honest with you,
I'm getting too far from the microphone. I don't want Jennifer to yell at me. So,
I don't recall.
okay. If I said that there were 10 parking spaces on the west side of the Karloff's building that have reserved stenciled on the pavement.
To be honest with you, Eric, I don't, Mr.
Okay.
Keller, I don't remember.
So if they exist, which they do,
I take your word for it.
is the intent to move those someplace else on the property? So
Sure,
that
we would have to, I would imagine. I don't know how they came about, why they're reserved, who they're reserved for. That would be a question for the operator of the facility.
Okay. Those are not designated as to who they're reserved for. There are other spaces that are reserved, but this is my time for questions. I don't want to get into testifying at this point.
Right.
The applicant has his case to make. But there are other spaces that are signed for specific tenants, and you haven't seen that.
No.
Yeah, I took a ride there last night, and the Arc has assigned spots also.
Okay.
And that probably around 1 through 8 in the pink. So
Okay.
it says parking for Arc,
Right.
and there's assigned
I
spots.
think that might be where they put their vans, if I'm not mistaken.
The vans are.
That's in
the vans
addition
are
to the
on
vans.
The vans are on the back side of the property.
Yeah. Okay.
With additional reserve park.
So I have a question. I'm just a little confused here. If the applicant came before the board prior, and the resolution says that there's residential building, and each one of those parking spots are to be assigned in the resolution, and they're not, isn't that an issue? Isn't that a violation of
It's,
what
yes,
was
there's no
deemed-
conformance with the resolution.
I know the operator decided to do whatever he decided to do, but I'm just confused because that's the way it was testified to, and now we're doing something different. And
So-
I'm having a hard time with
So the
that.
question is if the operator didn't assign the spaces because the residents didn't want assigned spaces, and he's operating it in a more functional capacity
I
to
think-
nobody's detriment.
Mr.
that's the
LaPierre, I think
concern
the
you have.
testimony that Mr. Lanzafama said that it's not that they didn't want the assigned spaces, they didn't want to pay for them, but that wasn't the testimony at the planning board. The planning board testimony was each one was
supposed to have a
assigned.
space. Each apartment was supposed to have a space.
There's a general vicinity of spaces available to everyone in that building.
I'm sure somewhere along the way I'm specific about that, because I'm crazy about parking and getting nearby. And I'm sure that I was concerned about the fact that parking spaces had to be assigned for the residents. And that's why I'm questioning this area now. But in fact, then, I'm sure it was also part of the testimony that apartment, spaces would be designated for the apartments.
It's
And
in,
it's in the ordinance.
it's in the resolution that Mr. Bowman just read into the record.
You mean Eric?
Eric, yeah. Eric.
Right.
Mr. Bowman, I wouldn't be here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good, Eric.
So your concern is that we need to assign, you want to have everyone have an
Well,
assigned
no,
spot?
listen, quite frankly, my concern is we agree to something and we do something else. That's my concern.
Well, again, the operator went through the lengths to number all the parking spaces, and it turns out from a business perspective, they didn't want to have numbered spots. They were okay with general parking, come, first served, because there's sufficient parking on site.
But that's not what was approved.
I think it's.
I don't know, am I?
Mr. LaParry.
It's an over-restrictive reading in order to try to comply with something that's already being satisfied. The reason behind it would be to make sure that every resident had a spot and that there wasn't issues with the parking. That's not the concern on the ground.
No, but that wasn't the concern, that wasn't the concern at the meeting of the planning board. The concern was that every resident had a spot here, not on number 7 or number 10 or here.
Right.
And based upon that testimony, the variance was given. So the variance was given with that understanding, and now that understanding is not happening. So doesn't that affect that variance with regard to parking? I would think so.
No, I don't think it affects the variance.
If that didn't work, there's a process to come back to here and say, this ain't working, could we change it?
I don't believe a parking variance was granted for the application at 264. I could be mistaken.
No, and again.
I think almost every, and strangely enough, I think almost every resolution at the planning board and zoning board, except the very first one, didn't deal with a variance for parking. And in fact, the original, I did a scratch sheet. The original required from 2016 was 399 required. Your proposed today is what, 393?
386. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 386.
Okay, 386, which is less than what was required back in 2016, and you developed a site with multiple buildings.
That was because of the EV credits.
Right, so what we have demonstrated, I believe conclusively, but we'll continue to have some more testimony on it. And even your traffic engineer agrees. This site is overparked by orders of magnitude, according to the experts. We have shown an allocation plan, which is not a reserved parking plan, but an allocation plan, showing that it fits even if we were to occupy every space. We're here before the board. If you want us to number the spaces, we have an opportunity to do that. We have all of these spaces where we show that they can be reserved. We don't believe it's necessary. We don't believe it's helpful because this is a shared parking arrangement. So when these residents go to work, the commercial tenants come in. When the commercial tenants go home, the residents come home. That's the point of the shared parking. We're showing it in every which way we can comply. I don't want to say it's nitpicking, but it's, we're picking up on little things like the banked parking, things that don't affect the addition of this senior unit. Whether or not there's banked parking and it got away, we're going to go try and find it in a resolution somewhere, really getting into the weeds and getting away from what this application is about and whether or not we can satisfy the parking demand. We've shown that, Mr. Keller has shown that we're at least 200 spots empty at all times on this site. That's really what this is about here. I'm not sure why we're talking about banked parking and things like that.
I'm just looking for a little history, that's why I asked about the bank part.
I'm
I'm still looking for a place to offload and unload the cars that aren't on here.
So even with the allocation you have here, where you said you're fully loaded, you still have enough spaces?
Yes.
But how can that be? Because if I come here, or my wife wants to park here, there isn't. Because you're showing 36 spots for the 264, when really you're required to have, I don't have the number in front of me, I'd have to open up the sheet, 70-something, 70.4, whatever it may
Parking
be.
demand for 264 was.
70 point something with visitors and the additional bedrooms?
66,
it's
about
on-
70 spaces.
Yeah, so
But
I
but Mr. Gasparini, that includes visitors. And you have to think about that relationship between the different uses. And your own ordinance talks about doing this very thing that we're proposing whenever there's a mixed use. It encourages it. And
It's
It seems to me that you're looking at the absolute impossible what if everybody was home at the exact same time and everybody was working at the exact same time and everybody drove every apartment had 2 cars, and that's just not the case.
Well, I'm not even talking about every apartment having 2 cars.
Well, that's what
But
you're
I-
saying.
Well, no, I'm
2
not. I
cars
mean,
at-
you could take a few away and there's still not ample parking. I know what the ordinance talks about. The ordinance talks about what's permitted, but on a shared type of thing.
Mhm.
But if we can't accommodate it, it's an issue.
There have been, at this point in time, I believe, 5 different on-site counts of cars by professionals. No one has come close to a full max out of the site, not even close. Mr. Keller hasn't come close, and he's trying his best, and Gary Dean hasn't come close. And he'll testify to it again as soon as Mr. Lonzafama's finished. But this has been rehashed and rehashed over and over again. We have the empirical data to support the fact that that is not the case. Your hypothetical is not the case.
Okay, but again, you're counting what's supposed to be reserved in the planning board application. These are supposed to be reserved under here. So when you're doing your counts, and they come in and they count the empty spaces under the residential, if I work for Keyboard Consultants, I'm not supposed to park there. That's reserved for the residents.
Right.
Right.
But
So that, yeah, it
under the
shows as an
building,
empty
but there's
parking
a-
space, yeah, because the
But-
person went to work. But this isn't shared. This is supposed to be reserved according to what was approved.
But only according to what was approved, it's only for building 264. which
Right,
is
but in the
those
parking
whatever
counts, we're
40-some
counting them as
spaces.
empty because they weren't home when they took a
Yeah,
count.
but you have 50% of the parking available. 50%.
And if it's going to be a senior, if it's going to be age restricted, they're going to tend not to get in their car and go to work. They're going to be there
And they have a
more,
lesser parking demand.
more than anyone else, I guess, and that would conflict with the industrial part where they're going to be coming during the day.
But your own ordinance kind of acknowledges the fact that the 55-plus community is going to have a lesser parking demand.
Right, right, and that's reflected,
Right.
absolutely.
And we satisfy that.
Yes, we do. Well, in our opinion, we do.
Correct.
This restricted building, will it have enough reserved parking space for each apartment? Reserved for each apartment? And
Which
will
buil-
it be
which buil-
designated by department?
Which
Just, I'm talking about the 55 building.
just the 55.
Just the
zone.
55 building.
Yes.
As you're proposing it, is there enough to reserve a space for every apartment in that building?
I
That's
believe-
required.
Let me just look at my exhibit again. So what we had done is we had allocated, what do we have up to 29? We have 29 spaces allocated for the there's 36 units, but remember, 4 of the units are going to be designated for the ARC residents that will not require a vehicle. Because obviously they do not drive. So you're looking at, we've on that scheme, that allocation plan, we have 29 versus the 32.
But the buses will be parked there.
I'm sorry.
The buses,
No.
For-
buses and
No,
buses.
no, no, not,
no, for the.
no, we're saying that,
Just this building.
Mr. Mayor, what we're saying is that 4 of the apartments in the 55-plus building are going to be reserved for ARC residents.
So that makes 35 apartments, correct? If it's 39,
30,
it's a
32.
39 unit building.
No, 36, isn't it? 36.
39.
30, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
39. 39, so
39.
So it's 35,
35,
correct. And we had indicated 29.
okay.
29.
Now, Mr. Lonzafama, it is,
Less.
oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
So,
LaForge.
no, I'm just saying that does not give one parking space per apartment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you don't think that's an issue?
No, it's an allocation plan. You're going to have
Okay,
this
but if this
constant
board
movement.
decides, that every apartment should have an assigned spot. What happens now? Because we're dealing with seniors. And quite frankly,
I'm not happy that they're across the
I mean, he's
street.
young, but if my mother had to walk, compared to my mother who's 93, if she had to walk from here, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, with all due respect, though, the people who are going to be living in these units, right, they take this into consideration. Not everybody who if you can't walk and you have trouble or you're mobily impaired.
Well, they take it to consideration now, but, you know, they don't know what it's gonna be for them in 5 years or 10 years.
Agreed, and that's with anyone. That could be with anyone at any age.
That's
I-
right.
I
That's
agree
why
with
we-
you.
Okay, so that's
But-
what,
but
I'm
some-
looking for now.
Mr. LaForgia, Councilman LaForgia, based upon what I've heard you say and the questions you've asked, you wouldn't live here, and that's okay, right? That's okay. You want to live on a nice single-family lot, and that's okay. Some people like that. Some people want to live in this type of a community, and some people enjoy that. Some people are a little more spry than others. I bet you a couple of you guys who are older than me could move around a lot easier than I could, and that's okay. But that's
Also looking out for the residents that are either gonna be able to move there or want to, or are needed to move there. And you know what? It's not the proper way. Again, we have our opinion. You have yours and I have mine. But the plan for an apartment without a proper parking space in a close proximity for it. That I know that when I come home, if I go out, and I come home, I know I have my parking space for it. That I don't have to drive around a few acres to find a place. Because I wouldn't like that, especially if it's raining.
Mr. LaPerry, real quick, the parking, the garages, are they going to be rented at an additional cost?
I don't believe so.
They're gonna go with, there's gonna be a designated garage spot for some of the apartments? which
I
would
believe,
be-
it's my understanding that the garage spaces will be reserved for the people of those buildings, or not reserved, but used by the people of those buildings. But they will not be, I don't believe there's an additional cost that I'm aware of.
So
or
are they gonna
additional
be
charge.
available, they're gonna be assigned?
Correct.
So apartment 1 could have number 9 garage?
Is
I
that,
mean, they're not gonna just be.
It's not gonna be first come, first
for
serve, in
served,
other
the
words.
garage.
No.
They're gonna be able to use it for
oh,
storage.
in the
like we
garage?
spoke in- Yeah, the
Yeah,
garage.
okay, yes, I'm sorry, I was
Yeah.
confused between under parking
So
and the
when
other
someone starts using the garages as storage and then takes up a space outside because they wanna use it as a storage garage and
Well,
not
that-
use
that
it for a
would-
parking space, how do you gonna?
building. That'll be
propose
an operational thing,
the
and
lease.
be built into the lease, it'll be restricted, and it'll be, observed and enforced by management.
Like everything else.
And what is the size of the garages?
I don't know, I'd have to take a look again.
They look different sizes. You look at them. Some look almost twice the size. This one?
Mhm.
And look at these.
Are about, 28
putting a transcript together
about
for them.
16 wide, about 16 feet wide.
I think they're various, aren't they? Looks like the ones at the top are 9, 10, and 11 look smaller than 14, 15, 16. I think they vary.
12, that one's 12.
My,
The ones on the south side of the building are a little more narrow.
Yeah.
It's the way the structure was developed by the architect.
Mr. Chairman, my guess would be that whoever's, getting an apartment and they pick a garage, they're gonna pay a little more in their rent, obviously, for the garage.
The garage, so they'll have an
That's of,
assigned spot.
that's of no concern, but it'll be assigned to one of, I don't know how many garages are there, 9 apartments.
So when I took a ride yesterday, seeing that where the dog park's going to be, seems like since that synthetic grass right now, is that gonna be the location of the dog park? There was,
Yes, where it is now?
Where it is
Where
now.
where we're proposing it.
where
here.
there's something there right now. and
Right
it's-
here.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's
that's
something in that
basi-
location already.
That's correct. It's similar. Yeah, it's the same material.
What is there right now?
It's.
They pre-built.
I think they had started to build it and then they stopped.
So did we go over what the car loft lounge is going to
Could,
be?
Mr. Chairman, could I just interrupt for 1 minute? So we can just finish up on this dog park. May I make a suggestion?
Certainly.
Because it's in the front yard here,
Yes, sir.
and it really doesn't belong there. Couldn't that be moved to between building number 8 and the school here, or whatever, building number 6? So it's in the side yard, it's not out
In
on the
here?
cul-de-sac, right up against the sidewalk.
Mr. Gasparini, were you saying here?
Yeah, couldn't it be moved to over there? So,
We could certainly take a look at that.
so that it's
possibility.
not where it is.
We're proposing it here, at the end of at the north side of the cul-de-sac.
Right, remove it and move
your
it over.
proposal is to place it
And-
between buildings.
I mean, it's still a
6 and 8.
variance, it's in a side yard, but I feel personally, it's less intrusive than having it up on the cul-de-sac, right in the corner, up against the sidewalk.
We can certainly take a look at it.
And I would assume that when it's built, it'll be flush with the ground, because right now,
It is.
no, right now you have to step up, or you need a ramp for a handicapped person to get in there with their dog, or whatever it may be.
Well, sometimes they put like a curb around it and they.
Well, this one's actually a platform.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Only because it came up, I just wanted to
Sure,
throw that out.
sure.
I don't see that as being an issue, but we will confirm that.
So we did agree that the lounge at the car loft is going to become office space and no longer going to be a lounge?
I don't know let's back that up, because I don't think that was what I understood to be with the discussion. The discussion was that it'll continue to be what it was, which is amenity space for the people at the car lofts. It's built out with pinball machines, I believe, and certain things like that, a little.
Still going to allow outside parties besides people that are not part of the car loft?
No, it'll be for the car lofts and their guests, as it was approved.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how it was approved.
How so? If it's a place of assembly, and if you're not calculating according to parking spaces, how many people will you have in that car loft? That's based on a UCC license, UCC construction code.
Well, however many are permitted. If there's a fire code regulation, obviously we won't exceed that, or else the fire department will shut it down.
How many spaces have you allocated for that?
There's no parking requirement for those because they're for the use of the people in the car lofts, just like,
And their guests.
correct, just like the neighboring clubhouses in certain community
How does
associations.
someone become a guest, or how does someone become a member?
I know the information and the answers to this from reading these prior resolutions. I don't recall exactly off the top of my head, but it's limited to the number of people, or there's some limitation, and there's an annual fee.
So Mike, what's the calculation for the rooms, or are we gonna have an architect come up? What is the occupancy load?
I don't have that with me right now. I don't have an architect with me tonight. We went through, our architect testified at the March hearing and concluded his testimony and answered the questions of the board. I don't recall if that particular question was asked.
So
What?
how many spots did you allocate for that?
Well, if we took it
None.
as office space, I believe it's,
Office space.
And we did.
it's like 4,000 plus square feet.
And in this-
Oh, yeah, thank you. You got that?
Yeah.
So in Building 10, we have 4,226 square feet indicated as the mezzanine office space, and we have 17 parking spaces for that
So
space.
someone can have a party of 100 people and you'll have 17 parking spaces.
Right. A guest and any resident in any community could have a party with 150
But it's
people.
not, it's a place of assembly and it's
not a
it's a
place of
life
assembly.
hazard use inspection according to the fire department. It's not any residence.
There has never been, to my knowledge, and I don't know if you have any additional knowledge, but that there's never been any summonses or any issue with regard to that space, the use of that space, or any violations as a result of any occupancy in that space. I'm not aware of it. If
So
you are, you
He
can,
calculated it as an office space and you're telling me it's a lounge.
there are some offices in that space, right? And there's also some open air spaces similar to a clubhouse for
Okay,
any
so
other
let me ask
community
you a
that would have
question.
it.
According to the resolutions, what is it designated as?
Amenity space.
Define amenity space.
And it's an amenity, it's like a clubhouse, like you would have a pinball room. This defines
How many
exactly what's
members
being
are in the
used.
club?
There's 99 cards, I don't know. I don't know how many members.
Yeah,
99.
Do you have a liquor license there?
A liquor license? No.
I think
other
those
questions?
questions are better asked to whoever owns it or runs it, than Mr. Lonzafama and Mr. LaParry.
Right, and we presented our application in full in March.
No, I'm saying that
Yeah.
if you have someone here that can answer those questions
Yeah.
tonight, I think they're better off going to that person than to either of you.
Right. And I believe these questions were asked, all the questions were asked in March when we presented all of our witnesses. And then we rested it. And then you asked us to come back because you said that you needed a traffic expert to review. And it was limited, all the additional review is gonna be limited to traffic.
I know, and if we go back.
We're not getting there.
No, I know, Mr. LaParry, I know, it, believes me, it's torturous for everybody. But if we go back to prior board hearings, we had a gentleman here that ran the Karloff's place who testified that it's not just the 99 members. Memberships are sold also. So that's the issue. Listen, no matter how we cut this thing, it all boils down to parking.
Yeah, I agree
Quite
with,
frankly, we
that's
don't
the
want
concern to the
people
board.
that are going to come and live here calling up, complaining about parking when there's nothing we're gonna be able to do later on.
Mr. Gasparini, we have heard that from you and the rest of the board loud and clear, which is why we are still here and why we continue to provide the empirical data that there are significantly more spaces provided than could ever be required at this site. We have done that by Mr. Keller, we have done that by Mr. Dean. Mr. Lonzafama has indicated if all of the sites, all of the people stayed home at once, we still have sufficient. Some of them may have to walk a couple extra feet, but they're within reason and they will be provided. There is no scenario based upon all of the expert testimony that has been provided in this application tonight and on all prior hearings that could possibly demonstrate that there will be insufficient parking on the site. Mr. Keller has been out there 3 times, and all of his counts show almost 200 additional spots each time that he's counted on his peak data. And I'm just estimating, Eric, so you don't have to call me out on it. I know I'm close. But the point is, it's not close. And that's what we're trying to get across here. You know, we're trying to nitpick, we're trying to find reasons like the Karloffs as to why there might be extra cars and extra parking, but it's not part of the application, and even if it was, we demonstrated that we have sufficient parking, both by the calculations in your ordinance, the shared parking arrangements in your ordinance, and the actual parking on the ground, which is actually our best support because we actually have been able to prove that the shared parking arrangement works sufficiently. And that's just not gonna change.
In your
And
opinion,
it seems to me if one of the big concerns is whether or not the 55 and up residents are going to have something close by, wouldn't reserving spots for that specific location satisfy that requirement if it's actually enforced rather than what was done with 264 where it was, stated but not actually done? But if we actually did that, would that address the concern that we've got, since it does look like there is sufficient parking across across all of the facilities, based on the counts that, the engineers have seen, and based on the fact that it's a functional environment? So if you take out the 30 whatever or 40 whatever spots that we need for the senior building, why not just reserve them, actually enforce it, and then move on with it?
So make it a requirement of any resolution?
Yeah.
what we have it now is a resolution and it's not.
Yeah, if I may, I think that, my opinion sitting here is, we go through this machination, we have all these proposed conditions, and the problem is they're completely disregarded. And Mr. LaParry, you've historically said your answer to this is that's an enforcement issue, that's an enforcement issue, but you're coming to the party asking for certain things, knowing that you're just gonna disregard them. So, you know, to everyone's point, who has confidence that even assigning parking is gonna be something that's gonna be productive? Because historically, you had conditions and resolutions. I sat on the Board of Adjustments. I was present during those hearings. And everything, let me not use the word everything, strike that from the record. A lot of things that were conditions of approval were completely disregarded, from party space, from allowing people that were non-members to have events there, and different things as well. So, you know, I'm just giving you my opinion. I think there's a lack of confidence of whatever we impute is going to be enforced.
Right, and that's unfortunate, but I do believe that a lot of the issues and concerns that you have are a product of things that are outside, such as the multiple, I'm sorry, this rain is getting loud. I'm hoping the lightning hits the building, actually. There were multiple resolutions, multiple applications, and I think some things may have gotten lost in translation. We're here, no one's making any misrepresentations. We're acknowledging certain things may have been overlooked or modified or confused along the way. There were also attempts for us to try to get into compliance where the applicant had submit proposed rules, regulations to the mayor, to the business administrator, in order to try to figure out exactly what was permitted, what was not permitted. Mr. Burry's aware of that. We sent it to him in December of 2022, saying, here's a list of what we'll operate this as so that there's no further confusion. Please give us some guidance and help us out. That ended up, again, one of those things where it was lost at the municipal level and it never got finalized. And then this application immediately preceded it. So we're here. We have an opportunity to clarify all these potential issues or pitfalls and make sure that there's not going to be any issues moving forward. You know, again, these are, and again, I'm not saying they're nitpicking issues, but the fact that everybody has spaces in the residential and they were numbered, we went to assign them and operationally it became, you know, unwanted by the tenants. So they're just sort of, okay, we're not enforcing it because they're allowed to go and do their own thing. If it needs to be enforced to every single person has and assigned, even if they don't like it, you know, if that's what this board believes is in the best interest of this community, you know, you can impose that condition.
I think from a perspective of the senior component, I think it's an important piece, personally.
And the applicant would certainly live with a condition if this board wanted to impose a restriction that the parking stalls for the senior apartments be assigned.
How about all residential?
What's that?
How about all residential? Because you already have one building.
Again, I mean, if that's the big concern of the board, you know, we've shown that's fine. We've shown that there's extra parking in the 264 area. But if that's what the board wants to do, we understand it.
I'm less concerned for the other residential buildings because there's people in there now, they're renting them. If there were complaints about the parking, that's something that they're dealing with internally, so let that be their problem. But for the senior building, where I think we've got a genuine concern about, you know, people who are seniors having to walk longer distances and things like that, that's, to me, the one that's important to reserve the spaces.
So just to set the record straight, the proposal that you're talking about that came to the mayor, the administrator, and the engineer, I believe was answered that you have to go to a board to seek relief to change the use in the car loss, club lounge, whatever they call it, to an amenity space, has to go to a board. It can't be a stroke of a pen by the mayor, the administrator, or the engineer. I just want to set the record straight. Didn't fall on deaf ears.
Okay, understood. My point was only that it didn't go anywhere, but we were making attempts to try to comply with the resolution.
Because the applicant did not come back to a board to do what they wanted to do, correct?
Well, again, that's why I said this application immediately followed. That was, I believe, December of 22. This application was filed in January of 2023.
Right.
So we're here now.
Right, no, I'm just setting the record straight. I didn't want anyone to think it fell on deaf ears and wasn't responded to.
But you're not saying that you think the planning board could put in restrictions on the operations at the loft? You're not saying that?
No, I don't think you have the jurisdiction to do
That's
that.
because it has to go to the zoning board, because they're the ones who grant you the variance.
Correct, and we're not proposing any changes to
Because,
that.
because the
building
bo-
or-
if you wanted, we could put that in.
No,
in
we're not
any-
proposing any changes to the loft, to the car lofts, or that building.
Any other questions from the board?
Not for Mr. Lanzafama.
A lot of rain out there, we can't even hear each other.
I know.
I'm 60% deaf in this year.
You have another witness?
I do, I didn't know if did we open to the public?
Want to open up
We're
to the
done with
public?
me?
Any from the public like to speak?
Oh,
Seeing no one, close the public portion. Thank you, Mr. Lund.
you're very welcome.
My next witness is Gary Dean. He's a professional engineer, a traffic expert with Dolan and Dean Engineering.
Good evening, Gary Dean. I appeared at the last hearing, and I understand I'm still under oath.
Yes, thank you, Gary. If you could please, I know there's been some minor modifications since the last hearing. You've also had the benefit of an additional review memorandum from the board's traffic engineer, Mr. Keller. So maybe you could just briefly discuss some of the points that you've already touched upon, but if you could touch upon them again, see if they still exist, and also maybe you could address any concerns you have with Mr. Keller's report.
Certainly. Thank you again. I believe in, and where we concluded the last hearing, that Mr. Keller and I are both in agreement that the site has plenty of empty parking. I don't think there's been any debate of that. I think the board members have heard the results of counts that we have taken on the site, that Mr. Keller has taken on the site, and just for simplicity and for ease in discussion, there's a peak demand of a site that is fully tenanted and fully occupied of 200 spaces. I don't think there's any debate of that. Mr. Keller's memorandum confirms that. The use itself requires 44. Add those two up, we need 244 spaces, and the site proposes 349. So we have, at its peak time, which is 10:30 in the morning, a surplus of 100. So I think whether it's your consultant or me, the data has shown that the site has plenty of parking. If I understand Mr. Keller's latest memorandum, it's where that parking is located and will it be sufficient for the proposed senior building. And as I heard Mr. Lanzafama's presentation, the questions raised by the board, I think a question was raised, excuse me, can we assign, given that it's senior housing, one space per unit? The answer is yes. We'd be happy to do that if the board wants that. And those spaces would be, I believe there are 13 garage spaces. We have 10 parking spaces southeast of the building. And I'm going to point to Exhibit A13 from Mr. Lanzafama, but the proposed building is located to the west of Karloff's, which is on the left-hand side of the exhibit. There are, on this, color-coded green spaces with an extended sidewalk that would be readily, easily, and conveniently located and accessible for those residents in the building.
Not 35.
Mr. Lanzafama also showed a number of pink and green spaces in the common access aisle between the existing apartment building and the proposed senior building. So with 13 garage spaces, 10, I believe, across the southeast side, and another 12, we can have one space assigned per senior.
Just to correct, it's 8 across the top. If I'm looking at the numbers correctly, 1 through 8.
Plus, there are 2 handicap spaces. Given the building, it's not unreasonable to think we will have handicap residents, or at least those who will qualify for a handicap space. So Anybody with.
How many
mobility
garages?
These are the
impairment.
garages over here.
Over here.
So there's only 11 here. Is 21 and 20 a garage?
These are the garages. I think
No.
that's
I believe
11.
there are 13
No,
garages. I will
no.
verify. Somebody on our.
That's
team
not a
can
garage.
Okay,
verify.
so then there's only 11 down here.
9, 10, 11. Yeah, 11.
9, 10, 11.
I may have counted an old plan.
Yeah, there's 11 there.
10, 11, you're correct. Thank you. So 10, 11,
21,
we would be 14 on the opposite side. And if, and I'll defer to Mr. Keller and whenever he's free to speak, but again, we have 100 extra spaces on this site. We have, I think, gone above and beyond, including your own consultant, to demonstrate the site has way more blacktop than it needs, way more parking. It's just, how do we apportion to make sure everyone on this board and the tenants, most importantly, are comfortable? The beauty of this arrangement is that as a predominantly business campus, there is a parking demand in the middle of a business day, Monday through Friday. At that time, the residents, except for the seniors, predominantly have left. As we get into the, and more importantly, Karloff's is essentially empty during the week. This is akin to a recreational, a weekend use for access of prized automobiles. I won't discount one person or two might show up on a weekday, but it's not an occupancy and a demand of 50 parking spaces in the middle of the business day. That's a predominantly weekend use when the other commercial and office and business tenants have closed. That is the essence of shared parking, recognizing that there are temporal time shifts of when this peak demand occurs. So how do we want to apportion all of this empty parking? We are open to the board's suggestions. I've offered you my solution. I will say, in looking at certain recommended design practices by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, for high sensitivity parking such as childcare centers, senior housing, proximity to medical facilities, that maximum parking distance is 250 feet. And if we were to inscribe a 250-foot radius around our building, it would go a far distance around the site. So those spaces, to the extent the board agrees that we would assign, would all be arguably within 100 feet of the building. So we're not even looking or contemplating having those seniors park in the more remote areas. Certainly no need for that even for Building 7. Now, that being said, I will submit, I walked further from where I parked in your municipal lot to the front door here. So it's a relative measure. We can do better than this building, and certainly visited by seniors at this site. So I don't think that there was much else in Mr. Keller's report. I do have to disagree with one fundamental point, which is, I'm quoting from the letter, we have not seen sufficient data nor evaluations that support the grant of a parking variance for the proposed senior living. I disagree with that because his own findings support 100 space surplus. So as I've said, and Eric, I'll defer to you, but the evidence is overwhelming. The site has abundant reserved parking, 50% more than it needs, and can readily accommodate the proposed use. And that assumes all those seniors would be home in the middle of a business day. Practically speaking, age 55 and above, I still go to work. I suspect many of you, at a certain age, 55 and above, certainly we're still going to work. So the premise that all of those residents will be home during the day, I think doesn't hold water, but it doesn't matter. We'll assume they do. They're all home. We still have 100 space surplus. And board members, that is all I have. It's a repeat of my prior testimony. I think Mr. Lanzafama's plan has more appropriately illustrated the parking for each of the different uses with the color coding. And again, subject to your concurrence that the senior spaces should be assigned. And again, the applicant is amenable to that. I really have nothing else to offer at this point.
No, I get numbered.
Any questions from the board?
I have a quick question, Carrie, just going back to the last meeting. Last time I think you presented, there was an issue that we discovered that your traffic count was taken, well, at least we know the school wasn't occupied. We weren't quite sure what else was. And if I hear you correctly, you're basing your conclusion on more or less everything being occupied. Was your updated traffic count done after, I guess, the CO for the school that the building department provided was January 30th, 2024? So I just want to make sure, just for the record, and as we're talking about it, that the conclusions are based on the school open and whatever you might want to provide in terms of verifying that there were no businesses empty and it was I guess, a fair snapshot.
Sure, no, and that was a fair critique, from the data we collected in October. The space was rented. It hadn't been fit out. And at the time we did our counts, it wasn't filled with employees, it was filled with contractors who all needed parking. So when we did our counts, the space was occupied, not by the end user. I acknowledge that. And Mr. Keller got involved and he did his counts in April. We took additional counts. They were done on April 4th. So it was after that CO was issued. And yep, we found a few more spaces than we had previously. I would say they're consistent with Mr. Keller's, but for one time in April, he observed 197. And that's why I said, I'll use his numbers. We'll call it 200. Forget about what I did. So now you have 5 different samples of traffic parking counts done at this site. I'll take the highest from Mr. Keller, 200, plus our senior. Back to that math. 244 is 244. We have 349. We have a surplus of 109. I can't make it any cleaner or simpler than that. And again, if I think may lightning strike me, so no.
Just a quick question. On building, to your point though, you're talking on this parking for building 7. Now you've got 1 through 22 spaces along that lower right hand, okay? Correct. Right there. Would you say any one of those spaces are adequate parking for the proposed building?
For the senior
Yeah.
building? This is a site, and your ordinance treats it as.
Would you park there if you lived in that building?
No, not if I lived there, but if my relative, my child was visiting me, that's a short walk to the building. So it's available parking. If I lived in the building, and I would concur, I think the suggestion of assigning spaces for those residents is important. I've done a number of shared parking for mixed-use sites, and I categorically say every time I do shared parking, whether it's retail, office, I say you need to have 1 space per unit allocated just for those residents. And the reason is, on President's Day, not everybody gets a day off, so we'll assume the center is, all the businesses are open. A lot of residents are home. Not all, but many. They should have a spot. They should have a spot close to their unit. So I agree, particularly given seniors. Now, sadly, like Mr. Keller, I qualify. I remember the day, age-restricted housing, 55 and above, and I went, oh my goodness, I now qualify. I still go to work, and I still walk and bike and do that sort of thing. I understand at 75, I may not be able to do that. So I certainly would appreciate, if not demand, as a prospective tenant, that I have a space close to my unit. And we can accommodate that, not unreasonable.
Any questions from the board?
I got a couple.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Dean, how would you, I asked Mr. Lonzafama the question, I'm gonna ask you the same one. How does the fact that there are reserved parking spaces on, right now, I'm just gonna talk about the south side, just what's on, I'm not gonna talk about the parking at number 7. You've made your point clear, but I wanna focus on just what's on the south side of Kingsbridge Road. If there are assigned parking spaces or reserved parking spaces that are designated for certain uses, how does that affect, in your opinion, the availability of parking that we've both observed?
I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I think from the layout of the building, you know, we're down to 3, I'll say, non-residential buildings, and I'm excluding car lofts. That's I think we can agree that's a unique land use in itself.
I'll agree that it's unique.
Okay.
I would not discount it, though.
I discount it only because Monday through Friday at the peak times, your office has looked at parking and we have. Car lofts is a non-event. I mean, if there's 1 or 2 employees, that's what I'm saying to me. So I have 3 buildings. I have number 6, number 7, and 264. You'll see, and then there's the apartment building. You'll see the massive parking on the southwest corner of the site. The senior building has no impact on that. I think we can agree. It's separated by a building, it's removed far enough, and it will be unaffected by the senior building. Same thing for building 7. It's on, we're only talking about the south side, so we're not even gonna talk about the south. Building 6 has the parking shared between all of the parking in the rear and some of the parking on the west side of that building between those. What we're proposing on the far eastern side of that, I don't think is in any way affecting those businesses or their employees or their ability to access that parking. The amount that is to be displaced by the senior building, I can't conceive that anyone in building 6 is even using that or over on this end of the campus. So we're doing it, and I'd have a very different opinion if the senior building, for example, were between 264 and 6. Now we have 3 different user groups, building 6, 264, and the seniors vying for that same parking. Over on this end of the campus, I say this, the eastern end of the campus, the only thing over there is car lofts and the existing apartment building where we can expect many of those people are not there during the business day. Car lofts is unaffected by the senior building. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I look at that impact of the senior parking.
Mr. Dean,
Hard pressed to come up with.
aren't there offices in the Karloff's building? There's suites. Aren't there suites there? There's some office capacity. I think I drove by and I saw a mailbox with multiple businesses in the front, that front part.
First floor, front, the north side of the building, right there.
No, that's in the senior building. I don't know that specifically.
Well, so on the internet, there's a very nice walkthrough of that building, and it's a very beautiful building inside. They show multiple offices.
I don't think it's
conference
appropriate to be talking about your own personal findings and investigations on the internet, unless you're gonna present something that shows it.
Okay.
But we do have a parking count for the car lofts that we testified to by Mr. Lonzafama.
But can I ask a question, Mr. LaParry? The car lofts, you're saying that that entire building has 2, possibly 3 people employed in there? Is that
I'm
basically
trying to get you that answer.
what I heard?
Thank you.
So let me just, from our parking counts, if I just take the spaces that currently exist on the north side of the
Wait,
building,
Mr. Keller, can you just hold on, because if,
Oh,
I
I'm
don't think
sorry.
that they're listening to the question, and I wanna be able to sure they can address it.
This is the mezzanine, this is the wall space. This is what's on the ground floor, that's actually. This is the car, and then the cars that we're not using, so it's 7,000 square feet. Okay, thank you. All right.
Mr. King, you are correct. That was a good observation. There is, as I understand, and it's on Mr. Lanzafama's, I want to get the title right. I don't know how it was submitted as an exhibit. It's entitled Lot 2, Parking Demand Calculations, Kingbridge Office Park, June 16th, 2023, revised, thank you, May 7th, 2024.
Just to be clear, this was submitted as part of our last, as the last page of our last engineering submission package.
What was the revision date?
May 7th of this year. It is showing an office component of 6,991 square feet that has a parking demand of 20, call it 28 parking spaces. And as I add up what we have around here, we have virtually that entire demand satisfied.
Parking allocation. Same thing as this.
Mr. Dean, despite all of these calculations, does there still exist, based on actual observable data, to be 200 extra spots at any given time on the site?
I would say at least 100 empty spots, including the senior building.
Right.
Under current conditions, I think that number's closer to 150, 160.
Right. So regardless of how many offices are in there, or how many, your counts and Mr. Keller's counts still show there's an abundance of parking, right?
Correct. I think what Mr. Keller said, if I can paraphrase again, is put a senior building next to building 10 that has office component. Is that going to displace a significant amount of parking that is otherwise required by that tenant? Is that fair, Eric?
That's part of it.
Okay.
The point, the discussion earlier tonight was that the resolution for the 264 building stated that there would be one reserved space per unit. That has not been the practice, but that is what the resolution stated. So if we take the highest parking count from our first observation, again, just looking at the south side, I have 183 or so parking spaces that were visibly occupied on that day, on the south side. Now, not all of the reserve parking was full. So that increases the effective demand, or the effective usage of the parking, because those reserved parking spaces can't be used by anybody else. They would not be allowed to, you wouldn't use them in your shared parking calculation, correct?
If they are allocated and specifically signed as reserved, correct.
Okay, they would come out. So you would, if I had 200 spaces and 50, just as an example, 50 were reserved, you would only analyze the supply as 150.
I think that's correct.
200 total spaces, but 50 are reserved. You would assume that all those 50 spaces were not available, and the demand would be, you're reserving them for a reason, because that's what, it'd be one per unit.
Sure, I understand.
That's not the number here, but, so if we added some number back in, and now we're adding the parking for the senior building. So we're already at 180 something. Say half of the reserve spaces under the building aren't being used. Now we're back up to 200, and we reserve all the spaces for the senior building. Does that provide, in your opinion, enough parking? Let me make it simpler. This is getting too confusing, and did you update your shared parking analysis that you had done back in December of last year.
No. And again, I think we're conflating what I call the academic exercise, which is let's go to the ordinance and let's look at time of day and let's look at these different uses and when they're each busy. The simplest way to look at it is, and that's great when you don't know what the site is doing. In this case, I've looked at it twice, Mr. Keller's looked at it 3 times. Real-world data, a study, is the more accurate means for us to determine whether there's enough parking. I think Mr. Szabo very kindly at a prior hearing concurred that the ordinance requirements are excessive and they're not reflective of contemporary design practice and standards. I'm not saying your ordinance is out of date, I'm just saying it doesn't comport with what we're seeing in the field. And that's why when we get into parking variances, hey, let's look at real-world data and not pretend that we're running calculations on some artificially inflated higher demand. So, Eric, back to your question, I'll go back and I'll say, we have 35 senior units that won't be, that there are 4 that are for ARC individuals. That means if we assign 1 per unit, that's 35 on top of the 200. I'm still at 235, and I've got 350 spaces to work with. I have plenty of parking on this site. I don't think we're in disagreement there. It's just, how do we want to assign them? And to your point, all right, let's say your count didn't capture over here at 264, some of the should have been reserved but weren't reserved or aren't being used as reserved. Okay, we can take that, we can work with that. But I still have 115 spaces. I've got a lot of parking.
But there's additional reserved spaces, right? The ARC and the buses.
Well, correct. But with 100 and plus, I'm not terribly worried that, as Mr. Lanzafama testified, 4 or 5 that had been reserved in the other apartment building, and I think it's 7 for the ARC vans. We're not that close. It's a delta of 10, and I still have 115.
Just, if I may interject for one moment, just to put some context in my statements about parking. In the re-exam, we had discussions. We, as planners, recognize that parking requirements are evolving as uses are evolving, particularly with respect to post-COVID and the hybrid working arrangements that are made. And we're recognizing now that there may be some, how should I put this, some modifications to demand that we should be looking at, but we have not conducted that analysis townwide yet. We have not settled on what the parking arrangements could be. So I just wanted the board to take that into consideration. Yes, parking is evolving, and it's evolving with uses. And as our uses are evolving, we're looking at things that we've never looked at before, and we talked about that during the master planning re-exam study. For example, kennels are no longer in vogue. They're animal hospitality suites now, and it's changed significantly. So, but we haven't undertaken that analysis. We haven't, I cannot sit here and definitively say that your parking standards are out of whack without having done the analysis that the township requires. And we haven't moved forward on that yet, just to put some context to the comments.
So, Mr. Dean, I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
If you were living in this apartment complex, assuming that you're married, how many cars would be in your family?
Me personally?
If you were married?
I have too many cars.
Well, no, just your husband, just you and your wife.
Now, that raises an interesting point in terms of lifestyle choice. So if someone is leaving their traditional single-family home, 2-car garage, 3-car garage, and they're of an age where we don't want to pay the taxes, I don't want to deal with landscaping, I don't want to deal with maintenance, we're downsizing. There might be a period where a spouse, each spouse has a vehicle, correct? However, that's balanced by, as individuals age in place, I would not be surprised that there are very able-bodied 75, 80-plus-year-olds that are widows or widowers and are down to one vehicle, or a husband and wife that just say, why are we paying all this money on insurance and car leases or payment, you know, whatever it is to maintain it? We don't need two cars, we do everything together, we're both retired. So it transitions, so there will be, and I think that's why your ordinance reflects a lower standard for senior housing.
Correct.
Is that correct? Some of the units may have two, and some of the units
And
will
a
have
lot of
one.
them may only have one, like you said,
Correct.
when you get to a certain age, sometimes it is only one car.
Correct. So I
But
think that's why.
on the other buildings that aren't age restricted, and that's where I'm having the problem here. Because when I look at all the other places in town that are apartments, there are couples that have two cars. So we're only accounting here for one car per unit. The rest of the cars have to find space somewhere else. Now, if that's the case at just 264, and they decide to park in the pink section here, which is these commercial things, then the commercial people are parking, I guess at number 7, down the Karloffs. I find it hard to believe that if you're going to rent a place, that you're not gonna have parking spaces in close proximity to the building. And that's where I'm really having a hard time with, because every other place that has been built has parking within very close proximity to the buildings. Now, I understand that this is a office park. Maybe that's the problem. It's an office park instead of a residential area, but it's a shared type of thing. I got the concept. I understand who's not there during the day, who's not there at night. Sometimes there's spillover. I have an issue with building number 10. I'm not gonna name the building anymore, okay? Because there are parties that go on there. I don't know where that parking is going. But I'm having a problem with the residential component of this. I'm all for the senior building. I've stated that in prior. It's a great use. It's great for the community, and it's great for people who want to downsize. I'm having a tough time with where we parking. Yeah, you know what? If my kid comes to visit, he can park in number 26 and walk over. Okay, no big deal. But I'm having a hard time with, you know, where do my wife or I park? Yeah, okay, I can park here, or she can park here, and I gotta ride around. That's the problem I'm having, and that's why I believe the ordinance specifies how many spots for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and whatever, and that's how we get to that number. Because there's another development in this community that we built to those specs, and there's a problem, because there's 3 cars, because there's a child living there now, and there's a 3rd car. So now there's visitor spots are gone. I don't want to see that happen here. I don't think the owner wants to have that headache, and I know the township doesn't. And that's where I'm coming from.
So you're not referring to, you said another site?
But not yours, not yours. Another
Right.
site in town that was built to standards, okay? And because we're talking about real world versus, what'd you use? Real world versus, whatever the word was you used. Make believe. Yeah.
I can't speak to that other building, I don't
No,
know.
I know you can't, and I don't want you to, but what I'm saying to you is they built it according to the ordinance.
Well, Gary, isn't that the beauty of the shared parking in this situation, and the ability for us to be able to gather the data on a site that's pretty much pre-existing already?
Well, better than that, because it's a business, call it a business park, just for simplicity. When residents of 264, and I don't know the number of the other building.
8.
Eight, thank you. When they're not there in the day because they go to work, we have available parking. Now, some of it has been reserved, and that's where the shared parking starts to fray a little bit at the edges. But it does, the wheels don't fall off this cart. If we have 1 space per unit, those spaces are off limits for the business people. That's an important consideration, but I think we've proven that. The senior building, we don't want, you know, one of our residents who, you know, is elderly, super elderly, or maybe has some mobility issues, we would hope they'd use the handicap spots. But to your point, you don't want them parking over here. That is poor planning. I would agree with that. So as we start to look at this, the way we compensate is you get one space per unit. But you also, as a prospective tenant, are told that. You don't have 3 cars. We don't have the ability to have 3 cars. Unless, hey, look what's right next door. Okay, you do have car lots. So, and I'm not making light of that. I'm saying that there is at least that 3rd car in the family, if someone's had, you know, a collector vehicle that they prize, perfect. They need that spot.
Yeah, that's
But
just
that aside,
too far to the.
I call it eyes wide open at leasing. Each tenant is told, you get a reserve spot, you get that. The rest is, we can't accommodate you if you have 3 and 4
Oh,
vehicles
I'm not,
in your house.
listen, I'm not talking about 3 cars. I started off with a husband and wife because most couples have 2 cars. I'm just telling you what happened in another place because there was a 3-bedroom. There's gonna be a 3-bedroom here. So there's gonna be another person parking. There's 3 bedrooms here now is what I meant. So there's gonna be another person parking. I'm discounting that completely. I'm just talking about the average couple, unless I'm mistaken, has 2 cars. And I'm having a hard time with where they park.
Sure. And I think that's why your ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, I'll defer to John. Is it 1.2 per unit or
It's
one?
yeah, it's,
Depends on the apartment.
5?
1 for 1 bedroom, 1.25.
Thank you.
The senior parking requirement, and it's reflected on
Not
Mr. Ludd's.
senior, the regular.
Oh, the regular,
Yeah, the regular.
that I have to look up. It's RSIS.
1.8 for 1 bedroom, 2 for 2 bedroom,
Right.
2.1
It
for
reflects-
3
Yeah,
bedroom.
but they're there. We're not talking, we're talking about the seniors, I
No,
thought.
I understand.
but
No,
it's
no, we're
just all
talking
one-
about the overall site here because we're changing the site. We're changing the site, correct? Am I wrong?
No,
The site is being changed tonight, or attempting to be changed tonight, correct? That's why you're
The
here.
application is for an additional 39 senior
Correct,
units.
so you're
yes.
changing the overall use of the site. You're making, you're making
we're adding
another
to it.
building, which is going to impact parking, so we have to look at the whole site.
But we've done that, and we've rehashed that over and over again. And the conclusion is that we have orders of magnitude more parking spaces.
By
than
ordinance,
parking
by
demand.
ordinance?
We don't have orders of magnitude by ordinance, but we have what we believe is sufficient. We came into this application stating that we don't believe we need a variance for parking as is. And we maintain that. We have a parking variance, we have EV credits, and we meet the maximum. What we're trying to indicate to you is that your ordinance requires a shared parking analysis. That's what we're presenting to you.
But the 38 parking credit from a prior,
That was a variance that was granted to this applicant that runs with the land.
But you're intensifying the use of the property.
The variance runs with the land.
Yeah, but you've had, I
That's
think
cool,
you have
that's-
had 7 different applications with multiple variances. That changes. You just can't couple like a train cart and run this thing through a planning board and say, well, 7 years ago, this is what it was. I mean,
No,
you
unless,
look at the whole site now. You're
unless the
changing the
a-
whole site.
unless the applicant abandons the variance or agrees. That's the law. You can shake your head.
I
That's the
understand.
law.
I
And you can look
know-
it up and you can read it.
I know
And I'm
the
sure you
law.
have. Then I'm not sure why you're bringing up this line of questioning.
Because this is a planning board. This is not a single variance for 1 lot residential. This is a planning board where you have a site plan that you've changed multiple times, and now you're changing this whole site plan again by adding yet another use with another demand.
We are adding a building. All the other buildings remain the same.
Yeah, but so.
Even if you want to talk about the other
I know, but
buildings.
when
We're not adding-
when
we're
I
not changing
started,
anything else.
on your back in your second planning board application in 2016, it was required when you did that one building for, I think it was, 18,584 more square feet. It was 399 required. You're almost right at that same number, but you've added all these things and
We've gotten EV credits, right? We maintained the variances that we were given, so things have changed. And we've explained that ad nauseum, I believe, at this point.
But the basis for a parking variance is based upon the uses that are existing today plus what you're proposing. So the fact that you got a variance, a parking variance at some point in the past was based on a use mix that existed at that time. That no longer is the same, so that parking variance doesn't carry forward because it's on a different basis. And I'm
Disagree with that wholeheartedly. We are adding to it, and we are showing the board and everyone else that we are adding an additional, 44 spot requirement. And we meet that.
I think the bottom line, and this is really the gist of my review and why I've made the statement that I did, is that you can't look at the site as a whole, and Mr. Dean may disagree with that, is you have to look at what is available proximate to where the demand is. You're putting a senior building on top of what is currently a open parking lot. You're increasing the demand by having the seniors. You're reducing the availability of parking because, and I'm not going to debate until I look at it, you know, what Mr. Lanzafama says was a net loss versus what I had, which was based on a prior plan. There's a decrease. So you're going up with how much parking is required and you're reducing the amount of parking available. You also have to look at it in the context of what is in that area. And I agree with Mr. Dean in that the parking demands for those two residential buildings, the existing one and the proposed, plus at least some portion of 10 Kingsbridge and a portion of 6 Kingsbridge, is all trying to use that same parking spaces in that area where there is a limited amount of parking that will exist should this be approved. That's all I'm trying to get at is, you know, Mr. Lanzafama's allocation map, not an assignment, is showing one space per unit for both the senior building and for the existing apartment building, which means that there is still additional parking demand of some amount that needs to fill in the parking that exists behind the building, as well as some in front of the building by number 10. And I don't disagree. I've done shared parking analyses myself many times. But the residential demand, whether it's non-age restricted or age restricted, at no point is it ever zero. There's always a residential parking demand, whether it's because people commute by mass transit into the city, they work from home, and we found that there were parking spaces under the building that were occupied in the middle of the day. That's what I'm trying to get to, and that's why I made the statement is I don't have enough information that says that there is enough parking in each portion of this site to meet the proposed demand that you're looking with this senior building. And even in some cases with the buildings that are there. There are reserved parking spaces that are at points not being used. The ARC has 12 vans. All 3 times that we counted, there were 10 to 12 ARC vans on site. You know, so, and Mr. Dean even admitted he had not updated the shared parking analysis. I'm not saying that you don't get there, but right now, and we spent a lot of time tonight talking about, does the residential building need to have 1 space per unit? I think the conclusion from the board, and I'll let them weigh in. The 264 building, it was part of the resolution. It was specifically stated. You've stated tonight that because this is a senior housing building and the demographics of the residents of this building are different, is that you're agreeing to provide reserve parking, one space for all of the 35 senior units in this building. Well, what does that do to the shared parking? You know, how does that, you know, play out? Putting aside what we have done in the, you know, the 5 occupancy counts we've done of the site.
Can I make a suggestion, and it may?
Yes.
I just
may
want,
give you the
before
information.
you do, just for the record, you were sworn in last time, you're understanding everything you testify here, you're still under the same oath.
I recognize that I'm still under oath, my license is still in good
Yes,
standing.
just for the record.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So, thank you. I want to go back to the traffic impact study we submitted November 9th. And on page 10 of that report, I won't ask you to dig it out. I'm going to hold it up and show it to you. And Eric, this is more for your benefit. We took a picture because we flew a drone. I put a picture in the report that shows the parking on the campus at the peak time we saw, which was 11 in the morning. And while we've been focusing on the entirety, I understand what Mr. Keller is saying is we need to focus on a very specific part of this site. We need to look at the area where the proposed senior building is proposed. And the picture in my report, if any of you have it, shows the exact number of cars that were parked there at that time. And we counted all of these fields and put our data together individually. If I could offer this to the board, and hopefully Mr. Trematore agrees, I would like to work with Mr. Keller and to get this board to a level of comfort that we'll evaluate it. We won't look over here, we won't look at 264. We will look at the demand in between buildings, we'll say 6, 10, and 8, to answer the question of, we put this building in here and displace all that parking, what is that going to do? Does it affect that many people? And as I look at this photograph, I'd say it might displace maybe 15 cars. Not a lot. Really absorb that elsewhere in the site. But if we could ask the board's indulgence, I would like to get you that, information, we'll put it on the screen, we'll show you the counts. I'll make sure I coordinate my data collection with Mr. Keller, so we're both seeing the same thing. But I think that might answer the question better of, we've agreed that the site has plenty of parking, but the effect in that limited area, can that be accommodated? Is that reasonable?
I have to point out that I believe that you pointed out the date of that drone being flown, and that probably, or maybe was correct then, but I've been counting for weeks, and there's 21 to 29 cars there now. Because I'm, as you know, I'm just really concerned about the parking here.
Sure. If we all agree that that would be appropriate scope to focus on that area, I think that may give Mr. Keller the information that perhaps he feels is not been provided to get you to that understanding. Does that seem reasonable? And if you've been counting it, that's great.
Just for me, I believe you have to focus on all the residential part of this property. All of it, not just there, all of it.
In the sense
Only because, again, I'm gonna go back to, it's 2 cars per apartment. Not in the age restricted, I understand that part of it, but it's still 2 cars per apartment.
But,
I don't-
Jim,
unless-
Jim, isn't that already being taken into account? I mean, they're functioning facilities,
Well, no,
both of the other buildings.
No, to put another building in here, they're intensifying the use. There's reserved parking for, the ARC vans. There's things going on there right now that are not depicted on any of this.
What are those things? For just so-
Tractor trailers are parked there, commercial vehicles are parked all over the place, on Building 7, I don't know what that's all about. You know, there's stuff going on, there's, there's trailers over here, there's, there's things happening, and I don't care, that's not the point. The point is, I'm worried about the residential. I really don't care about the commercial, I'm gonna be honest with you. That's his headache. But I'm worried about the people that are gonna rent in this place.
Okay, so we are talking about the senior building, not the other.
No, I'm talking about all the residential units, because in my mind, one of the conditions I want to see, and I'm going to throw it out there right now, I want dedicated, assigned parking and adhered to, because it wasn't adhered to in 264, for every residential unit. I don't see how it can work any other way.
Are you prepared to make that a condition of acceptance?
Yes.
All residential?
Yeah, I believe we can do that, right?
Well, hold, yeah.
No?
If we have, and I need to go through the numbers, because, for example, the residential requirement for market units, not age restricted.
Again, I'm not talking, I feel that each apartment should have a parking space assigned to it. Each residential parking space, apartment should have a parking space.
For all
That's-
buildings.
Well, yeah, that, first of all, apparently it was in a prior resolution that it was gonna be there.
For 264,
Okay.
the number 8 resolution was silent. It didn't talk about it.
Okay, but it was in 264.
It was clearly in 264.
Okay. Number 8, where the hell is number 8? Number 8's the one over here.
Right.
Okay, well, 8's certainly gonna be affected by, what number you used, 10, 10A, whatever. It's gonna be affected by the 55. So yes, to answer your question, I'd like to see a dedicated parking space to each residential unit. That's what I'd like to see. As a condition of resolution, condition of acceptance for me. That's how I feel. It's fine, it's gotta be maintained. Not that because it didn't work, it's changes. That's what we want for this particular mixed-use site. That's how I feel it's comfortable.
What about that?
Yeah, but that's all part of that.
And I think it should be reserved, assigned, and labeled,
Well, they gotta be labeled.
every one of them.
And they could put signage up around parking spaces numbered for residents. I'm not gonna say that each one has to be a sign in front of it, but it's certainly gotta be marked somewhere on the site, on the parking space. We're going around and around. Let's get to the point. Residential parking spaces have to be designated, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not crazy about where these are over here, but I could accept them, as long as they're there and reserved. But we're going around in circles here.
I thought we made good progress, so, and I'm not being glib, I'm hearing constructive critique and what gets you to the level of comfort that I think is appropriate for a parking variance, and if Mr. Keller's happy and we have a greater consensus, then we're moving in the right direction, so.
I have a question.
I welcome that opportunity if the board's receptive to it.
If they do assigned parking and someone's in an assigned parking spot, whose responsibility, who has the jurisdiction to enforce the infraction?
So in the packet, they submitted a Title 39, okay? And I'm going to oppose that because I don't think we should be the operator of an office park. That's on them. I don't think the township should have to deal with that. If there was a no left turn onto a busy street and we had to enforce it, and so the police could write a ticket, then I'd be fine with it. But I'm not gonna be the parking police for a private company that's
in business for whatever whatever they're leasing. That's my position as a township administrator. It's only one. The rest of the board could see it another way. I don't see it that we should be the police for a private entity on parking.
The only reason that's typically done, and you do it in shopping centers, is to enforce the handicap parking.
Okay. Okay, but.
Otherwise, it's
I-
a toothless
I
provision and the placards and
Yeah,
it's
no, I
meaningless. So.
understand that, but I'm sure the owner can handle that issue with who's ever parking there. He can call the police, can he, and have us come over and cite the car?
No.
No? Okay.
Without Title 39,
Then-
it can't.
then
It's private
Then
property.
that's on him, he's gotta deal with it.
Okay.
The landowner can sign a complaint against the person parking in the
Right.
wrong spot.
Right, that's
Or
all.
the management company.
Yeah.
The police department can go there, issue, and the complainant would be the management company or the property owner.
Yeah, under the handicap parking statute, it's the only statute that a private citizen cannot enforce. It's strange.
Okay, well.
But
I
the
just-
the fire lanes can be
I don't
enforced
want
by our
everybody
fire
falling on
department
their
and fire
spots.
inspector.
No.
If they're designated on the plan, according to the Uniform Fire Code, they can give a summons on private property.
And the other caveat to that is someone who's handicapped sees someone, they could take a picture and then file the handicap parking. So it's a police officer or someone handicapped. That's, I believe, in the statute. But if you're driving around and you're not law
Yeah,
enforcement.
I could just see a nightmare here when, you come home and my spot's number 32 and somebody's parked in it and now they're calling the town.
Yeah.
And we're, this is all we're doing. We're busy enough. We don't need to deal with that.
They should call the management company.
Exactly.
That's the way it works.
Right.
Works in
In-
our
in
office
my-
building that way. When you park in a reserved space and it's not yours, we get an email saying, move the car or it's gonna be towed.
Towed,
But that's
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
by the management company of the building, would not be any different here, since, the entire property is under common ownership.
Correct.
And it's probably integrated in the lease.
Yeah.
There's a provision about parking.
I would assume that there would be.
I don't have any further questions of Mr. Dean.
Anybody on the board have any questions? Anybody from the public have any questions?
Okay. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Now, my next witness I'd like to call Police Chief Manna.
What's
Fairfield
his
Township.
testimony gonna be?
I'm gonna, want to swear him in?
Yeah, but what,
He's going to testify about the safety and circulation. Those are the questions I'm going to ask him.
was there a question about it, or?
Yeah, it's been raised many times.
Is he acting in his official capacity? Did he do a report for the town?
No.
He's acting, I'm calling him in his official capacity as police chief.
Did he do a report?
He's here to testify.
As an expert?
No, as the police chief in town.
Okay, but you either have factual testimony or expert testimony.
Well, I'm going to ask him in his capacity as police chief. You can decide whether or not that's factual or expert.
That means he could run the police department, and he's the police chief of police, and I totally respect Chief Manna. But I'm trying to understand
He's a
what his
city
capacity
official
here would be.
with information that may be relevant to this board and the concerns that were raised at the hearing prior and at this hearing, whether or not.
So has
certain-
he provided any of that information to the, as part of the application?
I'm going to ask him tonight, and he's
Yeah,
going
we
to
have a
testify
traffic-
to it, and that's
Well,
permitted.
So he's just gonna, so he did it, there's a Traffic Safety Bureau report.
Okay?
That's our official document, that's fine.
Are you going to tell us, is it you're taking the position that the police chief in town is not qualified to testify about safety and operations of the site?
Again, I don't know if it's expert testimony, or is he factual? Does he sit out there and observe things?
I'll ask him the questions, and then he'll give the answers.
Can you
and we'll know.
proffer that? Because if he hasn't done it, I think we're wasting everyone's time.
I think this is a waste of time.
I
The-
certainly
The
don't.
testimony is going to be very brief and short, and I'm going to ask him some questions about his opinion on the site. It was submitted to the police department. Your board has an opportunity to call any of the township officials, and so do I,
Then why are you calling Chris Nemec, who wrote the report?
because I'm
Why are you
calling the
calling chief
police
of
chief,
police?
who's qualified, probably more so than the person who wrote the report.
Well, I'm hoping that he's in the Traffic Bureau report, and he has a the expertise.
Why don't we,
in
why don't we
traffic.
let you ask the
But
questions?
but it's not
If you
gonna be
find
here,
that-
it's not gonna be hearsay testimony, is it? I mean, it's something that he either
Let's
factually,
ask,
so.
let me ask the questions, and then we'll find out.
Well, don't
There's
you-
no limitation on the
Don't
questions
you,
I'm allowed to ask.
don't you know what the testimony, isn't there a proffer of what the testimony is gonna be?
This is, you're wasting the time right now of everyone here. I'm going to ask him some questions about the traffic safety and his opinion about the site as was prepared and submitted to the police
Okay,
department.
so his opinion, is it an expert opinion?
It's his opinion as the police chief, so sure.
So you're gonna qualify him as an expert?
As an expert and as a police chief expert, I'm sure he could be qualified. He's been the police chief here for as long as I can remember. But I think I think you know, and I apologize, chief, that you have to even listen to this, but can I continue?
You can call him, but again, the weight of his testimony is gonna be dependent on if he qualifies as an expert on something that we don't even know what's gonna be
Well,
discussed.
and I'm sure
or
he has factual
is a
information.
Factual observation.
I'm sure he may have factual observations as well. Let's ask him the questions, and we'll see what he says.
Okay. Sir, raise your right hand. Oh, by the way, is there any objections? Sure.
I'm a little confused by the chiefs here, but
Okay.
I'll let him speak.
All right, raise your right hand, sir. Can you state your name?
Yeah, Chief Anthony Manna.
Okay, and you're the chief of police of Township of Fairfield?
I am.
And how many years have you been the chief of police?
8 years.
Okay. And your testimony here today, is it expert testimony or is it factual testimony?
I don't know how to answer that, sir.
It's a combination.
Okay,
I'm asking
so
if he
with
has
regard
any-
to your expertise, based on your testimony, what's your expertise? What training, you could drop,
Thank you, sir.
what type of training have you gone? I guess it's with regard to traffic. Have you gone to any specific traffic courses that would qualify you as an expert?
Not of anything recent.
Okay, and have you ever been testified and qualified as an expert into, you know, traffic safety and testified before any courts?
Not as an expert, no, sir.
Okay, so it would be factual. So you're qualified as a factual.
You're
witness.
taking the position that you're going to not qualify him as anything but a fact witness.
That's correct.
He's not an expert, and that's your position. You're not going to ask the board to opine on it. That's, you're
I'm
just
sorry?
going to make that determination for the
Well,
board.
I don't believe that there's enough being presented to qualify him. I
Okay,
mean,
and that's your decision?
I've asked the questions, and that's my recommendation.
Okay, that's the difference between a recommendation and a decision.
Okay, then
I think we all respect the chief of police as a chief of police.
It's
He's been
not
the
coming
chief of
across
police in
that
the
way.
town for many years, and we all respect him as a chief of police. We're confused a little why he's here, to be quite honest with you, because we've never had a police officer come and testify on behalf, a chief of police come and testify that didn't do the report. That's the confusion.
Okay.
I certainly would listen to what he has to say. We totally respect the chief, but he didn't write the report. So we'll just put it into the record that he wasn't the person that did the report.
That's fair.
And the credibility of his testimony will stand on its.
Okay. Thank you for questioning his credibility. Mr. Manny, you can have a seat.
I've not been sworn.
Okay.
So you swear, or, I'm sorry about that, Chief, you're absolutely right.
That's okay, sir.
You swear that the testimony about to give before this board, the true self you got?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Again, I apologize for the,
There's no need to apologize.
I only have a few questions for you, Chief, and again, you've been you stated you were the police chief in Fairfield for 8 years?
That's correct.
Were you with the Fairfield Police Department prior to then?
Yes, for 39 years.
39 years prior to the 8 years?
Yes,
Okay.
inclusive of the 8
Right,
years.
okay. You're familiar with the site at Kingsbridge Road?
I am.
And you've listened to the testimony and you've seen, I guess, some of the documents that have been presented as part of the application?
Yes.
Can you tell me, are you aware in your time as chief in the last few years, are you aware of any traffic or major safety concerns that took place at the site?
You would have to qualify. We have not had specific calls relating to traffic issues at the site, if that's what you're asking, but I can't answer what you mean by that.
That's what I do mean, yes. Have you had any significant traffic concerns, calls, stops?
No.
Periods of, issues where your cops or your officers were, out there routinely due to complaints?
No.
Do you ever receive that you're aware of complaints about the traffic on Kingsbridge Road?
Yes, to some extent. We did receive probably, I guess, when car lofts first opened, there were complaints of engines that were revving during car meets, if you will. Those things have ceased. We did dispatch police officers there, but that has not been a problem for as long as I can remember now.
You heard, you may have heard, there was some discussion about a car carriers dropping off certain exotic cars from time to time and to the car lofts. Have you ever had any complaints that you're aware of on, I guess, Kingsbridge Road about car carriers becoming a traffic or life safety issue?
No, not to my knowledge.
Are you aware of car carriers operating anywhere else in town that may become issues?
I am.
Can you tell us about that or where they might be?
Yes, there's conditions on Bloomfield Avenue where car carriers unload. Our officers have been instructed when they see that to rectify that because it's an extremely dangerous situation. There have been car carriers on Skyline Auto Auction at 100 Route 46. The same applies. Our officers have been told to rectify that as that's a danger. And most recently, there's been myself stopping a car carrier that has gone twice to a home on Hollywood Avenue for loading a personal car. And in that case, I didn't feel that that operation was unsafe.
Do you, in your opinion and in your experience as the police chief, do you have any major concerns that the occasional car carrier dropping off a car on Kingsbridge Road would cause any significant traffic issues or any life safety issues?
Based on my experience and opinion, no, I do not believe that would be the case on Kingsbridge Road.
Okay. Did you happen to request that signs, no parking in 1 hour signs, be put up on Kingsbridge Road?
I did not.
Do you know if anybody in your department suggested that?
If they did, they didn't do it with my knowledge because I did not know that.
Okay. Are you aware that in the last month, 2 no parking in cul-de-sac signs, 5 no parking anytime signs, and 6 1-hour parking signs were installed on Kingsbridge Road?
I am aware of that.
And did you observe those personally?
Yes, I have.
And do you happen to know if it wasn't anybody in your department who instructed those to be installed?
I do not know.
Okay. And do these signs, did you find these signs that were put up in the last month to be a benefit to you and your department?
I will say that because those signs were placed up, there are conditions that have existed throughout the town where similar signs are not posted. I am taking a proactive approach to notify businesses to try to find out what the extent of their parking is, whether they have sufficient parking, and or just whether they're just violating the 60-minute rule. I've walked around the areas of Just Road, DeWay Place, Kulik Road, and have gone into businesses there. Some have said that it's for convenience that they're not using their parking lots. Others have told me that they just simply do not have the parking in their parking lots. So
I would just, counsel, that's hearsay, and I don't know that these streets that the chief is talking about, do they affect this property or this application?
I think he's giving his opinion overall as to whether or not, compared to these streets on Kingsbridge Road with the signs recently installed, whether or not it's an issue. Similar to when the board members have referenced other sites nearby to demonstrate whether or not there could be an issue.
do you want to continue?
Please.
Okay, so ultimately, what we're trying to determine is if there's parking sufficient that our enforcement would not have to be taken and taking into consideration that maybe the ordinance might need to be changed relative to the 60-minute parking. It appears it will impact a number of streets, and that was never the case until this situation was, the signs were put up and the ownership of Kingsbridge Road brought that to my attention and pointed out other inconsistencies around town. So I had to try to figure out a way to best figure out an enforcement strategy and to ultimately try to resolve this problem.
Thank you. And I guess just finally to conclude, Chief Manna, have you seen anything in this application or any of the testimony from the applicant that would give you pause for concern about any serious traffic or life safety issues?
I'm not going to comment on parking because I've listened to that parking. I have no opinion on the parking. I don't see, and I was present when Sergeant Nemec reviewed that plan. It was in my presence. We were both there. He pointed out what, he felt. He showed me all the different things. And in his opinion, and in my opinion, based on what we spoke, it was fine. The application did not present any issues for the police department insofar as traffic is concerned. Again, not commenting on parking.
Thank you, Chief.
And if I can, I just want to say, I'm appearing here because, Mr. Gaffone, you said it's at written request in my official capacity from Mr. LaParry. Just, I want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Any questions from the public for the chief? Thank you.
I have one more witness, but before I call my witness, I do have some additional questions that I'd like to ask of Mr. Keller, because he did submit a report, and I'd like to ask him some questions. I'll keep it brief. Mr. Keller, you were sworn.
Yes,
You're aware of that.
yes.
When were you retained by this board to oversee this application?
See you in a second.
And you can also let me know what you're looking at to find it.
I am looking at all of the data that was provided to me by Ms. Miller to prepare or to do our analysis. And in that data file was our proposal, which I could also look. I was contacted by Mr. Burry sometime mid-March, and our proposal to the township was dated March 18th of this year.
So Mr. Burry was the individual who reached out to you about the application?
That is correct.
And in addition to the documents you identified in your expert report, I think you enumerated them. I have the most recent one enumerates 1 through 8. Were you provided with any additional documentation?
Yes, I have a copy of pretty much every document that was submitted on this application. I did not look at all of those documents. I mean, there's probably 50 different documents. My focus was on the traffic and really on the parking. So the documents that I reviewed are those listed in my initial review memo that is dated whenever it was dated.
I think it was April 16th.
Thank you. And May 20th. Those are the documents that I looked at.
You've also sat here and testified about various prior resolutions, and those aren't listed in there. Did you review the resolutions, and who provided those to you?
The resolutions were provided. I don't recall where they came from, but it was some of the discussions when we, in reviewing this and preparing our reports, talked about past approvals. So I don't know if I requested it or it was just provided. I don't recall.
When you say discussions, who did you have these discussions with?
I had discussions with Mr. Burry, Mr. Zabo, Mr. King, and Mr. Gasparini.
Did you have any additional discussions with anybody else other than the members up here, any other board members?
No.
When did you have those discussions with Mr. Gasparini and Mr. King?
I don't recall specifically. I can look through my notes.
Was it Mr. Gasparini and Mr. King together or separately?
They were conference calls.
They were always on the call together?
No, I don't know that Mr. Gasparini on one was on his way to getting on a plane.
And what did you discuss as far as this application with Mr. Gasparini?
Well, they were common discussions about the history of the application. This is the first time that I am reviewing this for the planning board. As I've testified to before, I have I was retained by the zoning board for the Karloff's application, so I have some knowledge of this, but I don't have the full history of this. So it was a informational discussion for me to understand some of the history, because from a parking perspective, it all relates together.
Okay, and I'll come back to the Carlos, but in your report, you make mention of a discrepancy between a tax assessor's measurements and the measurements provided by the applicant, right?
Correct.
And did you ever reach out to the tax assessor to inquire about the discrepancy?
I did not. Mr. Lanzafama testified to it at the last meeting in April and said that the numbers that were in his site plans were accurate. It was based on leasing information. And I took Mr. Lanzafama at his word.
But you didn't remove it from your May 20th report after that conversation. You still make reference to the discrepancies. If you agree that we're moving on and that you're satisfied there's no discrepancy, I'll stop asking.
Well, the first paragraph after the list of documents, it says the testimony at the April 23rd planning board meeting was that this information, meaning the square footage, was based upon a review of lease and as-built information and is accurate.
So we can agree there's
I'm
no
not disputing
discrepancy.
that.
Okay, thank you. You took, or your firm took traffic counts, or you counted
Parking occupancy counts.
parking occupancy counts,
Yes.
thank you, on April 9th, May 8th, and May 9th.
Yes,
Did you attend any of those?
I did the April 9th one.
You did
I
the
had
April
one of
9th.
my staff at my direction do the ones on May 8th and 9th.
And what is that staff member's name?
Sam Pandaigua,
And that was for both days?
yes.
Did you take any photographs, drone footage, or anything else to verify the accuracy of your counts?
No,
You're just relying on yours and Sam's
yes.
counts?
We're counting parked vehicles.
Right. Is it possible when you drive around the site, a couple cars could be moving while you're moving?
There maybe have been one or two. Yes, it's possible. He was told to count the cars that were actually physically in spaces. If I saw a car moving and it was pulling into a space, I counted that as a parked car, because if I got there 2 minutes later, the car would have been parked. I take, after 40-plus years in this business, I take a little professional, whatever you want to call it, professional aptitude to say, that guy's going to park his car, so I'm going to count it.
Now, the basis of your report, as I understand it, and I think as you've testified, is that your concern is that the parking spaces are not evenly distributed.
It's one of my concerns, yes.
There's no ordinance requirement that you're aware of that requires a parking space to be within a certain proximity of a door. Is that correct?
I did not look at the zoning criteria for that. I'm looking at it from a practical and functional perspective.
Is there any objective standard that you applied to determine whether or not one parking space was too far?
Generally, I use for residential parking, Mr. Dean testified to 250. He's a little bit more conservative than I am. I would use 300.
But there's no objective standard as to the distance between a site as to whether or not that you didn't apply an objective standard, did you?
There are industry guidelines that we all follow. They are not hard and fast rules. There are professional and engineering judgment decisions that we make as, not only as traffic engineers, but as engineers in general, as to what is most appropriate and for a given situation.
So you eyeballed it? You eyeballed it?
I would say it's a little bit more than an eyeball, but also after 40-plus years, I have a pretty good eyeball. I got new ones too, so it's even better.
Are you aware of any ordinance in the township that prohibits the use of grass paver parking stalls?
Again, I did not review the ordinance. Those grass paver parking stalls were constructed under a prior approval. I will not presume as to the reasoning for that. I was not part of that application. My comment on the grass paver parking is that in general, in the industry, grass paver parking is for occasional temporary use. It is not intended, in my opinion, in my experience, to be used on an everyday basis. Using it on an everyday basis will turn those grass paver parking into dirt paver parking due to the wear and tear of those spaces. So I just brought that issue up as a function of the type of, predominantly for this particular application, the application before the board is for senior housing. I don't believe that grass paver parking is appropriate for senior housing use.
But you acknowledge that they were approved?
I'm assuming that they were approved because they exist in the field. Mr. Berry, reviews projects after, and has his staff inspect the sites as they're built. So,
Are you aware that those particular pavers are ADA compliant?
Or
ADA compliant?
no, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Now, in your report, you also mentioned that, and I'll quote it, the actual usage of the mezzanine space, this is referring to Building 10, further exacerbates the shortfall in parking. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what were you referring to, or where did you get the information to form the basis for that opinion?
Two places is looking at the Karloff's website that it advertises for events of that space, and also my prior experience with the zoning board, not for what they were proposing to use, but what there were claims and discussions about what the space was being used for.
Did you go to the website yourself out of curiosity, or did somebody direct you to it?
No, I went to the website myself.
And what were you looking for when you went to the website, if you already knew what was being used there or what was approved?
Because I wanted to look, I had looked at the website in the past. I had not looked at it in a while. I wanted to see what was the current information on the website.
Did anyone outside of your office, meaning outside of Bowman, review, comment, edit, or review the memoranda before it was final?
No.
It was only you who edited it? Did anybody else in your office edit it?
I wrote it, I edited my work, and then I issued it to to Jennifer and to Steve.
And your initial submission to the board, that was the submission that I got? That was sent to the applicant?
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to find out if your review memoranda was edited, modified by anybody outside of your office? Meaning,
No.
was anybody in the board, attorneys, outside professionals?
No.
Okay.
It's my work, my document, and it was not guided, changed, modified, or otherwise, revised in any way by anybody but myself.
Okay, so you did conclude in your report that there were between 51 and 61% occupied spaces as a whole. Is that correct? I could point
Is
you to
this
it.
in the May 20th report?
I believe so.
Yes, on the last page, page 5. Right, of the parking available today, it was 51 to 61% occupied. And we also noted that there were over 50, and based on seeing the spaces underneath the building as numbered, we assumed that those spaces were reserved because they were all numbered. There are 29 other spaces that are either painted with the word reserved, or there is a sign in front of the spaces that says reserve. 8 of them are reserved for the school by Stepping Stone. 11 are reserved for the studio art, which are on the east side of the 264 building. But based on the numbering of spaces underneath the buildings, we had assumed that they were all reserved. And in total, there were over 50 reserved parking spaces at our counts on May 8th and 9th that were not occupied. And those would increase the effective occupancy to as much as 81%.
Was that the range you provided, 70 to 81%?
It's 70 to 80.
That's a little bit of a swing.
Yes.
So 70 to 81%.
And that's based on the lower data from May 8th and 9th. The count that I did on April 9th was more of a total amount of parking. I did not have a plan in front of me, so I couldn't tick off which spaces, exact spaces were occupied. When I had my staff go out and do it, I gave them a plan to market specifically which spaces were occupied.
So in your opinion, based upon all of these observations that you took, all of the observations that Mr. Dean took, and all the testimony that was provided that you've sat up here and listened to, what is the peak parking demand for the site, overall site? What is the peak parking demand?
Well, the peak parking demand needs to be based upon a shared parking analysis, which Mr. Dean has not updated.
Well, I'm asking you what it is. You took the counts, you sat here, you listened to all the testimony, and you put an opinion together. So what do you think, in your opinion, as someone who is retained to testify on this application, is the peak parking demand?
Well,
You have your counts. You could probably take a look at your counts for the overall site and come up with what you believe, having observed these 3 different times and listening to Mr. Dean's testimony 2 separate times, what's the peak parking demand?
based on a shared parking analysis, taking out not taking out the 10 reserved spaces by the car lofts, because I wasn't sure that they would be replaced.
But now you know that they are.
Okay. If I do that, then the peak parking demand, I can't do it this way. And this is only for the south side of the site.
I'm asking for the entire site.
For the entire site?
That's the question, yes.
Okay, hold on. Oh, no. Bear with me a second. And are we assuming that all of the residential parking is reserved 1 space per unit?
No.
No?
No.
Well, then I'm going to take, because the resolution says that the 264 building has to have reserved parking. 1079.
Can you repeat that? I apologize.
The resolution for the 264 building said that that they would have reserved parking.
Right. I'm just asking the question for the site overall as a whole, what is the peak parking demand?
Well, I have to discount the reserve parking because that does not go into the total demand when you look at a shared parking analysis. The total parking demand for this.
the peak parking demand.
Counsel, I think he is answering that he can't do that because under his analysis, you would take out all of the reserved parking, and you heard this board.
Eric, are you saying you can't answer the question? You can't come up with a peak parking demand?
Because you
site?
have not defined exactly the terms. If you're asking him.
I'm not, if he can't answer the question, let him say he can't answer the question. You don't have to tell him why he
Well,
can't answer the
I'm not-
question.
Counsel, I'm trying to help you here because it's getting late, and we have two other applications behind you. So
If
you're asking him to come up with a
You're
nebulous
not-
thing.
You're not helping. It's not a nebulous thing. It's
It's
not.
a very
you're not
nebulous thing,
helping.
because he's testified as to what the resolution to say, and if he takes that into account, it's one thing, but you don't want him to say that. You want to base it on some other thing that you want an answer to that.
So,
Let me ask a question since Mr. King is not satisfied with the way I asked the prior question. Is the peak parking demand based upon your April 16th, 2024 report 172 spaces?
no,
Why not?
because that was a one-time observation of what was on site. It doesn't include the senior housing parking. And if we look at, when I do a shared parking analysis, and I'm using the data that Mr. Dean had in his December 19th report, I took his data, I'm not using our observations. I'm using what Mr. Dean put together with some modifications. The peak parking demand for the entire site is based on the analysis Mr. Dean did, plus with my adjustments for where things are today. The peak parking demand is 331 parking spaces, which would imply that there are 17 available spaces in surplus. But all of those spaces in surplus effectively are across the street at number 7.
Well, he's questioning the witness. When he's done, yeah, I get to cross. Unfortunately, you don't get to.
Understood. Of the actual site, what did he observe was the peak parking demand on the south side? That's the only question we need to answer. It's not a calculation. It's what did he observe?
I don't have any further questions myself. Mr. Dean has a couple.
What do you want? You can do. We're just going to break to talk to the other applicants because we don't want to.
We have about a minute or two of questions left, and then we're done. I think we're two questions, three questions.
Is Atlantis here? Atlantic here? Atlantis Group LLC. All right. Come on, can you step forward? We're gonna need to carry you. So I need a motion to carry Atlantic Group LLC. All in favor?
Where are we going?
You will be carried to April, what did I say?
All right, so
June 11th.
June 11th is the next regular
With
meeting.
no further notice,
No
yeah.
further notice.
and you'll consent. You'll provide all extensions.
All right, thank you.
Okay, June 30th, consent to an
That's fine.
extension.
And if there's an issue.
Carried to June 11th.
11th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry for the confusion.
We put the time to good use, and we've got to know one another.
Take care. You can continue, Mr. LaParry.
Sorry?
Sorry, you can continue.
Thank you. Apologize. Like I said, I'm finished with my questions. Mr. Dean just has a couple follow-ups.
Very succinctly, Eric, in your report, you indicated on the busiest time you saw, which was April 9th, 197 cars were parked on the total campus. And on the south side, the peak demand was 172. Isn't that what your report says? Page 3, fourth paragraph. And this is, and I want to get to the assignment of parking, which is why I'm asking the question.
Page 3?
Yep, April 16th report.
Oh, April, oh, okay. Page 3, third paragraph?
Fourth.
Oh,
Last
fourth.
sentence.
Okay, I'm sorry. 197 total, including ARC vans.
The last sentence.
Were 172 parked, 283 available.
Perfect. Of those
Inclu-
172, because we have building 8 and building 264, I'll assume some of what you counted were residential spaces, correct?
I'm sure there were.
Perfect, that's okay. Board member had asked if we assign one space to every unit, there are 110 units.
Well, this is questions, it's not testimony, correct?
I'll ask
He's
the
setting
question
up the
then.
question.
And is he acting as, he's not acting as the attorney, is he?
Look, I'm questioning
Please
Mr.
just get
Keller.
through. We
I'm
have a
sorry.
couple more questions.
Okay.
He's a professional, professional. Just like
Just
we're
asking
done with
questions.
him.
This is so simple. Sir, it'll take 1 minute. If we have 172 and we assign one space to every unit, there's 110 units. That brings our total parking to,
Well, but you can't. You know, all of the spaces underneath the building that were numbered were not all occupied. As I said in my May 20th report, 54 to 56 of those spaces that we had assumed were reserved were empty. So if you added that, call it 55 spaces to what we observed,
just hear me out, Eric,
Okay.
real quick. 172 spaces. Let's assume that's 100% commercial parking, 0 residential. If I have 110 residential spaces assigned, that's 282, correct?
correct, yes?
And there are 283 spaces on the south side. We have enough parking.
That doesn't account for the fact that you have visitor parking, you have second vehicles for the residential.
I'm just talking about the request that 110 spaces come off the shared parking, correct, at 11 in the morning?
Correct.
Okay. So that means we have enough parking. I know we offered to provide more, but that's, I know I have buffer because some of your 172 includes residents that are there. That would be part of the 110, so we've double counted some of those. I will
Correct.
refine the shared parking to put a bow on that, but I think from the practical side, I want to be responsive to say, yes, we can
So
assign
this is
one
questions.
space.
This is, you're testifying now.
Would you agree then that if we were to assign one space per unit and we had 172 conservatively, we would have sufficient parking on the south
I'd
side?
have to review your.
That's fair.
your report.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks.
I have one last witness. My last witness is Christine Cafone, our professional planner, who has previously testified but is here to testify again.
Ma'am, you've already been
Yes.
sworn, qualified, all your licenses are still in force and
Yes,
effect.
they are. I've just renewed them both, actually.
Great, congratulations.
Current and valid. So again, my point in coming this evening is just to provide a statement that based on that additional testimony that was offered, my opinion remains unchanged, that the applicant is entitled to the variance relief that we're seeking. One thing that I did want to bring to the board's attention, though, is that under the new affordable housing regulations, it's very likely that the board will be able to seek rental bonus credits for the special needs housing that's being proposed in conjunction with this application. So this, in my opinion, remains an approvable application that meets its statutory burden of proof for the grant of the variance relief. The variances that we're seeking are not dissimilar than relief that has been granted on this site previously with regard to parking, with regard to building coverage, and with regard to total impervious coverage. It is my position that variances do run with the lands. There's been many times as an applicant testifying, for example, if you're doing a gas station application, you know, and you testify to a quick check, and operationally, the board is always quick to remind us that it might not be always a quick check. It may be a different type of operator, and that their variance is granted to the land, and it does run with the land. So I do think that the relief that is being requested in conjunction with this application has been granted substantially similar relief in the past, and I see no reason why the board wouldn't continue to grant any relief that's being requested. I did provide the statutory burden of proof the last time I was testified here with regard to the positive and negative criteria, and nothing that has been presented this evening would change my opinion that the applicant is not entitled. In fact, with the new affordable housing legislation, I think this becomes an even more important project to the township as an opportunity to create the ability to gain credits where you may or may not wind up with a shortfall in your current round where you have a plan that's satisfied till 2025, but this certainly presents an opportunity for you to get additional affordable housing credits.
Thank you, Mrs. Capone. And again, there's nothing that you heard tonight that would sway your prior testimony, which was extensive at the March hearing.
Only to say that I thought Mr. Dean presented a really nice solution. I understand in listening to the testimony of the board, it's clearly very important to you that not only do we have enough parking, but that we have the parking adequately dispersed throughout the site, and that each individual unit would have its own parking. So from a planning point of view, it's tough to argue with that. I think that is a good suggestion. I understand why the board would want that, and I think it's a reasonable request to ask and to implement here. You had a willingness, and I thought Mr. Dean provided a really nice workout and an opportunity to work with Mr. Keller to come up with basically a layout plan where the parking is properly situated and with in excess of 100 parking spaces on site for the peak demand. I think the applicant, we could certainly accomplish a satisfactory parking plan. So that would be really the only change. I didn't offer any comments on that because that wasn't really on the table last time, which I think would just make the application stronger and put the application in a better light.
One question.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, you said your opinion, the approval, variances carry along with the land.
They run with the land, yes.
Okay, do you also feel, in your opinion, that conditions that were placed on approvals should be also carried along?
They do run with the land as well, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Anyone from the public? Seeing no one, thank you.
Thank you.
I have no additional witnesses. I'd just like to provide a summary when it's appropriate.
I just have one question, and you
Yes.
know I'm a little stuck on offloading and unloading cars on your municipal street. If what you're saying, if you have an abundant amount of parking, why is it not being considered to put somewhere on the property to offload and unload cars? So you don't have to do it on Route 46, don't have to do it at another location.
Well, I think, you know, and this is just my opinion, I think the reason why we would be hesitant to use some parking spaces when we agree there's an abundance is because that we've been challenged so much with our opinions that we have such an abundance. If this board would acknowledge or agree with us that we had such sufficient parking, we might have been able to entertain that, but that just hasn't been the case.
So would you consider having an area, even if you had to block parking spaces, to offload and unload cars?
We can do that at Building 7, which I believe all of the traffic experts have testified is overparked at Building 7. So there would be some room that we would do that, and we would ask that it be a condition of any approval rather than having to come back because we've been here for way too long.
So are you talking about by the dog park?
In that location, that area, I don't know if it's exactly by the dog park, but we would make it work, and I believe your traffic engineer had indicated that there's plenty of extra parking over there, and so did ours. So it wouldn't be much of an issue if we were to realign some things. But yes, we would certainly entertain that.
What do you guys think?
Have you summed up?
I have not.
No, he's gonna do it now. Do you have any
Where-
additional questions?
So Pat, where are we at? Because I had heard that Mr. Dean and Mr. Keller were gonna work out some kind of,
That would be, we're asking for a vote. I believe based upon the last 15 or 30 seconds of questioning, it became apparent that they're pretty close in their opinions as to the parking and that it could be accommodated if the board conditioned it upon, or conditioned the application or approval upon numbering the residential spaces, that there would still be a sufficient number of spaces by plus one. And so with that testimony that I heard, I believe that Mr. Dean and Mr. Keller would be able to come to an agreement if this board allowed him to.
I think Mr. Dean said that he would need to look at whatever report or numbers that, I'm sorry, Mr. Keller said he'd need to look at Mr. Dean's numbers. I don't want to.
Right, and that was to resolve a discrepancy of a few. Not a discrepancy of a large magnitude.
I think they've committed to providing one reserved parking space for every residential unit.
On all three buildings.
On all three buildings. That's my understanding is what, see Mr. Dean nodding his head up and down.
Excluding the four in,
The special needs
the
housing,
special needs
right.
housing?
They don't drive.
No, but I'm just,
Yeah.
so we're clear, we're
Again,
saying every unit
that's-
or every
that's-
unit excluding those?
That's the ironing out we were hoping to have amongst professionals, is to iron
No,
those
but
little things out.
if we're
But-
trying to word a condition,
Right. We're excluding the four?
110 reserved parking spaces would be 39 and 36 for the two existing buildings, 35 for the senior building. So every resident would get one parking space, guaranteed, reserved, numbered, however, and it has to be, numbered, stated on, painted on the pavement that it's a reserved space.
Would that not include the garages?
That would include the garages. I mean,
The garages would already be
because the
designated.
garages would only be for a resident of that building. And there would have to be conditions within the lease
Right.
that those garages are used to park a vehicle and not for
Not
storage.
storage.
Right.
and those parking spaces would have to be in the lease also, correct?
In a lease.
In a lease, right?
Each lease.
Yeah,
Right.
each lease.
Correct.
I just have a question when you, go ahead, I'm sorry.
But what about my concern?
Well, so that,
Do we
have I'm just,
Go ahead, go ahead.
So that makes sure that every resident has one space.
Right.
So they're putting aside what's on, there's 50 spaces over at Building 7. There's 298 spaces on the south side of Kingsbridge Road. Let the ones over at 7 be overflow for whatever, but not for the residents. So you have 298 total spaces, 110 are reserved.
But there's still residents that may have to park in Building 7, correct?
It's possible, depending on the time of day, how, that's the one thing with parking is it's dynamic, and which is why I wanted to review Mr. Dean's report on how he sees it operationally and functionally. But you have 298 parking supply, 110 are reserved, so that leaves 188 spaces for the second vehicle, for residential visitors and for all of the commercial use.
How about the reserved for the
Oh,
park and
right.
those, and handicap?
So-
And the EVs, because isn't there an issue with EV spaces can't be calculated into that unless they're EV?
This is my concern with trying to, you know, you have, well, put aside the EV, because the EV, in, you know, I'm looking at physical parking spaces. There are 348 physical parking spaces. But if you designate 41 EVs, they can only be used by an EV car. Now, the current statute, and Steve and John, you know the township ordinance better than I. The state statute says for residential, you have a phase-in period. They have some apparently that already exist on site. If the 41 would not all be designated for the residential. The commercial EV has no phase-in period. They're all make-ready under state statute. For residential, it's a third at the outset, a third in 3 years, and a third in 6 years. And I think the thought process with that was that with the push to try and get people to move to EVs, that phase-in period would match up to the transition and the increase in percentage of EVs. That still holds, I don't know.
But does that number eat up the demand of potential overflow parking?
It does, I mean, because if you don't have an EV, you're not supposed to park in an EV parking space.
And those parking spaces, they're signed, you know, you can
Yes.
only use it to.
I mean,
to-
the township ordinance requires them to be signed and specifically states that if it's an EV parking space, it can only be used by an EV vehicle.
So does that now also further affect the available parking?
It could, depending on how many
Isn't
electric vehicles.
Isn't that the point?
Hmm?
Isn't that the point of the EV legislation? To encourage more people to purchase these EVs and to drive them? And that's why they're required to put them in? I mean, isn't that the way that everybody's talking, is eventually there's gonna be all EV?
I think I,
You have one?
I don't know, or was it an end around for parking?
I don't think the people who enacted the legislations
I
were trying to do
think
anything
you're
for
right,
parking.
but what it does is I think it takes away a parking space from a non-EV, you know, a gas car unless you have an EV, you can't park.
Right,
in
but
those
there's a demand for them now, is the point. They need to have them so that the EV car has a place to park and charge its car. And again, that's an operational thing that could be worked out. We've agreed to, to work together, the professionals. Eric, you're on the applicant side a lot. This is not uncommon for you to say, let's work together, and you do work together. And oftentimes, probably 9 times out of 10 or greater, you're able to iron out these minor details when the two professionals put their heads together. That's all we're asking. We've agreed to pretty much everything that this board has asked. We've made the accommodations, and we just were asking that the professionals work together to tweak out some of these minor site plan parking issues that we all agree can be resolved.
I think the only, and Mr. King, you brought up a point, there are also 19 reserved spaces for the school, plus the 12 vans. So out of the available parking, there are 31 parking spaces that would not be available at non-school hours, because the vans, as far as I know, were parked overnight there. And the 19 sign spaces would not be able to be used by residents or visitors during off-peak hours because they're signed for that. The only thing I would suggest is that, and this is up to the board, my suggestion, there were 10 reserved spaces by car lofts. If the board or, the applicant feels strongly about them, they have to be on the east side of building 10 where nobody else would
But I
really
think
want to
all
park.
those issues are, to council's point, something that would be worked out with professionals, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Those are easily achievable obstacles, if you would even call them an obstacle.
I'm the board's professional. I am giving you technical advice. I don't make the decisions. I don't vote. I want you to understand my position, what I see are issues, so that you can make an informed decision. So, I'm not saying that we can't work the technical things out, and if for some reason we don't work them out to everybody's satisfaction, I know you don't want to hear this, Mr. LeBarry, but we'll be back here. Because it'll be a condition of the approval.
Eric, you'll work them out.
So basically, we won't see anything. We're just gonna vote, approve something based on you guys working something out, and we'll never see it again, and it's done.
Well, we could have Mr. Burry, it'll be,
Usually
we could send it to
it's-
Mr. Burry as
Yeah,
well.
usually they would have a recommendation, and then it would go before this board. You either would accept that recommendation or that, whatever they cobble together, because I would think that your client too would want to see that, because he may not agree to it.
It would be a resolution compliance issue that we worked it out. So we've agreed in principle that we will do what the board had asked and what the board engineer and our engineer had agreed would be a workable solution. During the resolution compliance period, before we can go ahead and build it, we have to make sure that Eric signs off on the plan as agreed to with him and Mr. Dean. And then him saying, yes, this is an acceptable plan, this is what we suggested, they followed all of our recommendations, everything is on the up and up, then it would be a check off the box, and we'd be able to proceed from there.
So what they're looking for, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're looking for a vote here subject to this agreement, and if not.
Well, as a condition of approval.
Condition of approval, and if not, then, number one, if you did agree, subject to, then you'd have to agree that whatever agreement they come to, that you're good with, which you wouldn't know, or you just want to vote either up or down tonight. Because the board could say, you know what, we don't think you've proven your case, or we think that, you know, the expert disproved your case, and we're not happy with it.
Right, we're asking for a vote.
You're asking for a
Right,
vote.
if you attach conditions to the vote, based upon this discussion, we're okay with that.
And your agreements would be worked out between the professionals before memorialization.
No, it would be after memorialization of the approval. We just wouldn't be able to move forward with the project until it was worked out. I think that's the typical way it works.
Is it, Peter?
Well, so you could do that, but on this case, you're kind of deferring the responsibility to your traffic expert to agree with their traffic expert as to what they think you're okay with. You would not be able to have a second bite at the apple.
Nor would the applicant.
Could the board direct you as the board attorney to prepare a resolution of approval to be memorialized or voted upon at some future date, and have the professional engineers get together and work out a solution that would then be presented prior to adoption?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
the board could see it and be satisfied
So
with it?
I've
This
had
way you-
that done before as well, where we draft a resolution of approval subject to all these conditions. It gives the time to the, you know, the traffic expert, if there's any planning issues, the engineer, to put things in there that need to be done.
And it
then-
limits the scope of the involvement, because now we're focused on one particular, on the conditions
Correct.
and making sure that they're satisfactory, particularly with respect to parking.
Yeah.
And if they can't agree, we're right back to where we are right now.
So then you would come back and vote once you had everyone's agreement in place in front of you. The other issue is if they ask for a vote tonight, you either vote yes or no.
Can I ask a question about the assigned parking?
Sure.
If we're gonna assign, if you're gonna assign parking for every resident, right? My only concern is, from what I remember earlier on, about 3 hours ago, you talked about you had assigned parking and it failed because there was an additional charge for it and people weren't going for it, and operationally you made basically a line of scrimmage audible to say, okay, we're not gonna do this anymore. This new assigned parking is gonna be unconditional. In other words, you know, if Joe Smith gets unit 1 in building 264, he gets a spot. It's not his rent plus a spot. It's built into the rent kind of thing, right? It's not going to be a moving a moving target.
That's what I understand the board is advising that they want to see, and that's what I think we have acknowledged we'll do that. And again, I think it was more or less of a, I don't want to say an oversight in the past, but if no one wants it, why are we doing it type of a thing, and there's been another dozen approvals, it's sort of what fell by the wayside, and no one brought it up until now, you know, so that was one of those things, I think, it just fizzled away. But if that's what the board requires, I think we've agreed to figure out how to make that work.
Okay, thank you.
Have you summed up yet?
I have not, but I sort of did inadvertently, so I'll keep this very brief, because I'd like to, obviously, everyone would like to move this forward, so, you know, again, I won't go in, we've been here, like I mentioned, since January, since 2023, so I won't go into how we got to May of 2024. But along the way, our experts have testified at length, this site's a permitted use, it's suitable for the site, it's suitable for the affordable housing, it's permitted in the zone. Your planner and our planner have both recognized that this is part of the town's fair share housing settlement and will be a benefit to the township moving forward as the next round is quickly approaching. Our economic expert testified that this project would have a significant benefit to the township by requiring minimal additional services with the addition of the age-restricted units, and would yield tax revenues to gross about $173,000 annually. It would also add to the school budget. With regard to traffic and parking, I think we have demonstrated between the your own traffic expert, our engineer, and the police chief that there's no concerns with the traffic. The parking, we're going to make it work. We've agreed to make significant modifications and adjustments at the board's suggestion in order to make this a site that you could hopefully be satisfied and confident will work from a parking and traffic standpoint. You know, we wouldn't be here 16 months later if we didn't make such significant changes, and I think that shows the applicant's dedication to trying to make this work. You know, I think we've justified all of the minimal variances. We're really not asking for much. We're minimally decreasing the impervious surface. We're only asking for about a 2% increase in building coverage at the same time. We've addressed all the landscape issues, access, circulation. We've appeased the fire department and their concerns with regard to drive aisle widths.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt the summation. None of my landscape comments have been addressed. I thought they would be, and they haven't been.
They will be. I think we agreed.
Stipulate to
We
this
made an
report.
agreement that we would
That's fine.
incorporate all of the issues of landscaping in your plan.
That'd be fine.
Okay,
And that will also be in any resolution
yeah,
as a condition.
that's fine. And I think most importantly, I think it's important to note that we've been here for at least 8 public hearings, and we have not had at any point in time a single objector from the public come out and comment against this application. So I think it took us a while to get here. I think we have a very positive application, and I hope that this board does the right thing for the township and votes to approve this application. And thank you for your time.
And again, the resolution or the motion by this board will to direct the attorney to work with the applicant's attorney, the professionals, both the traffic and the planners, to put together a resolution based upon the, you know, the agreement to testimony, and would be a resolution approving, subject to the agreements as to the traffic and the planners, that they have to agree to at a later time.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to clarify, the resolution will be adopted before or after the planners conclude their,
It would be after.
okay.
So
and
we're going to work on drafting a resolution.
That's fine. Can we at least identify what conditions are there to be so that I'm not surprised when I see a document?
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that one of the conditions, of course, is the parking. There's this issue, and I don't want to say it's close, but it seems like it's workable between the traffic. The planner had some comments with regard to the landscaping, which I think was addressed. I think we have to address, you know, the loft, would put something in there that the zoning resolution approvals dictate what uses can be, you know, at the loft. I think that's an important thing. I think we have to put in that the residential will be individually one unit, one traffic space per unit. I think we have to, parking space, I'm sorry. We have to address the moving of the dog park to that space on your plan that the administrator had pointed out. We would have to we'd have to agree to the changing of the lanes based upon the fire department's.
I think that's been resolved.
Yeah, they've agreed to it, but it's a change that we're gonna have to put in there, right? We're gonna have to,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah, the only thing is with the zoning board resolution, the zoning board resolutions will remain in full force and effect.
Well, it's a standard language that
Yes.
I put in all
I just
those
don't want to relitigate what those mean because it's
Well,
confusing.
no, but if there's any things, you know, I think it's important that everyone knows that if, you know, if anything is being done there at a future date that's not in compliance with that zoning board ordinance, I'm sorry, resolution, that's an issue with the zoning board.
Yes.
And we're not granting by granting this approval, we're not agreeing to anything other than what was previously granted by the zoning board. We're not modifying, you know. that
Correct,
use.
I agree with that.
Trailer unloading for the,
So that's the interesting thing, again, in that zoning board resolution, it's quiet on that. And I haven't, you know, there's the applicant, and I don't think you disagree with this, there's no modification to your plan.
We don't have to modify the use of the zoning board to modify an available for additional loading and unloading on the site.
You addressed using building 7 for that, am I correct?
Right. Correct.
So that would, Peter.
Okay, but
Yeah.
if this board is good with that, because if it's not in there, you're giving them something that they.
I'm okay with that, but
Okay.
do you have to do a circulation to make sure it can make that bend, a tractor trailer?
And that's why he said we'll figure that out. If there's any significant changes as a result of that, we'll ask for, I guess, some recommendations from your engineer, or if there's, you know, again, if it requires a curb cut move of a foot, I don't think that's something we need to
Yeah, no, I
come back
don't
to the
think
board.
that's the problem. I just don't know whether the trailer will make the actual 90 that's in that parking lot.
If it doesn't work there, we will then,
We could
figure
also
out-
limit it to certain size trailers.
yeah, or just say we won't, if it can't be limited to the certain size trailers, we won't do it.
Okay.
So there are trailers that bring cars there now? Is there somebody who can testify to that, or we're done with that? I mean,
We did. I don't have anybody now that can do that. We testified in the past about it. I don't recall, I mean, there were some specific questions. I don't recall exactly what the testimony was. But I know there are some.
so they're
cars
still
are
doing it, or?
Cars are occasionally brought to site. I don't know that it's always on a car carrier. It could be on cars, you know, where they fit inside, like a larger box truck where it's just one car inside.
A trailer, like a little closed trailer.
An enclosed trailer.
Could I talk, when I was there, and why there's a little bit of a stickler for me, there was 2 tractor trailers unloading at the same time. They were parked parallel, both facing out. One was left the curb, and they were both facing Passaic Avenue. So they got in there, they turned around, and then the cars one car could fit at a time to get into the back apartments. So that's kind of why it was a little stickler for me.
I understand. Building 7, hopefully the change to Building 7 will completely resolve that issue. If it can't resolve that issue, then perhaps Mr. King and I can wordsmith a resolution to make sure that your concern is not a concern in the future, and that what has happened or what you observed doesn't happen. Either it's just not allowed, or we have to go down the street, or whatever the case may be.
Should we get somebody to testify to that?
I'm saying that as a condition of approval, we would accept that. As far as the testimony, I mean, I'm just taking Mr. Cafone's concern and saying that we'll agree to a condition to address that.
What about the adoption of the Title 39
That has to go to mayor and council anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, I just saw that on the sheet.
We put in the application or the paperwork, and it's up to the mayor and council.
I mean, you could always put something in there, but at the end of the day, it is the recommendation of the mayor and council. And I think, it's another added burden on the taxpayers of the town, so I don't know that they would necessarily make that a condition of
That's
this
why I
type.
brought it up, because I know Administrator Gasparini mentioned it, so I just wanted to make sure we dotted all our i's and crossed our t's.
And there's one more condition, I believe, that's very important. Those 4 apartments have to be deed restricted for whatever the proper terminology is for,
The park people.
Yes,
okay.
we've agreed to that, yes.
I'm not making it.
I'm not gonna make it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, you ready?
We're ready. Everybody ready for a
Mr.
vote?
Chairman, I'm gonna make a motion that, we accept the application.
Well, you're gonna direct the
Well,
attorney
Right.
to draft
To draft the
Resolution.
resolution, that, and now give me the right words.
that,
Peter.
that the professionals are gonna work together to present then at a meeting to,
Present that resolution
to the
with
planning
those
board.
conditions.
Yes, with the
correct?
conditions, at another meeting where it would be voted on.
That's my
We would
motion.
extension.
Yes, we're definitely gonna need an extension, which I'm sure you're gonna agree to. Maybe you won't, I don't know.
Nah, it's not that. I'm just trying to see. I mean, isn't this it's my understanding this would be a vote to approve the application subject to conditions, and thus preparing a resolution that is in accordance with those conditions. You have to vote on the resolution.
That resolution will be presented to us at the next meeting.
So they're directing me to work with you and the professionals
Yeah.
to come up with an approval resolution that we all agree to.
Right, my only concern, and it's not a concern, is just I want to make sure I don't leave here and things change. It appears that, based upon the testimony, well, and there's not been a vote yet, but in principle, we have outlined an approval with conditions. I'm okay with that.
Well, well.
And I understand you're not going to adopt,
it's-
memorialize the resolution
You can't,
until we resolve a couple of those issues.
yes, so we can't approve an adoption until we have the resolution to present to the board. It would be, I think.
Well, it's like any other vote, right? We always prepare the resolution after there's
No,
a
the
vote.
adoption of the resolution will be the action of the board. There are two options under the land use law: vote and memorialize, or adopt the resolution approving.
Because the problem that you have in this situation is they're deferring their charge, their obligations to us to come up with it. And if they don't like it, because we've missed something, it's you could get a denial on this. So this way, we put something together, we present it to them, and they approve it, hopefully, as long as it meets all these conditions.
That's it.
Basically, it's an outline of an approval.
Yes.
I want to get this going.
Yeah, I just find it peculiar why it wouldn't just be an approval, and then if the document didn't reflect what the understanding was of the board, you would
Well, I
say,
think
this is
there's
not our
enough of a
understanding.
There's enough in question to make sure that what we've all discussed for the past 3 hours is workable, put together in a operational plan, and we're
Right.
gonna see it in black and white, and then that's what we're gonna vote on as a resolution.
Yeah, right now, there's open items that they don't know what they're voting on, so I would
So
not.
we would be carrying this too, at the same time, to the next hearing.
Yeah, yes.
And do we know when that hearing is?
About, I would need, we probably need 4 weeks, right? Probably be after the June 11th, next available after June 11th.
We could all work it out
What's
by the next hearing.
Regular meeting after the 11th? After June 11th. I don't know, July and August. It's gotta be in July sometime.
And I'm sure you'll call me tomorrow.
July 9th is the regular planning board meeting. No, it's an official calendar.
July 9th. And at that point in time, if everybody's satisfied with the way the resolution is adopted, we'll vote to approve and memorialize it in the same hearing.
Yeah, and your client will carry it to July 10th.
Let me just double check before I say anything.
I understand.
That's the best solution.
It's the only solution.
Yeah.
Given the open items.
Yeah, and you don't know what those, so you can't. Yeah.
June 25th. Huh?
Unless they wanna do the workshop, June 25th, no.
Huh?
Do July.
They wanna wait.
just should be, you know, present it, and look at it, we have a, you can come and there may be some questions with it. Either vote up or down.
Yeah, okay.
So you'll, no further, you know, you'll grant extension without any further notice.
That's still July 9th, I heard that correctly?
Yeah, you're gonna give us the July 10th, because we always do it like
Yes.
the day after.
That's no problem.
So we got a motion from Councilman LaForge. We need a second. David Dutcher.
Mayor Galise.
Aye.
Mr. Gasparini.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Cafone.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll probably get out of here a little bit late, so I won't be in the office at 7:30, call around 8.
You're luckier than I, I'll still be there.
The call will be expected.
Let's get this started.
Yeah. We'll change it. Yeah, just, give me a call tomorrow. No problem. No problem.
All right, so we may have some at the end of June 11th, end of June, workshop.
Yes. I hear you. Have a good night.
You'll just send a letter and then we'll do it at the, you'll carry it out.
No, I would, because that would mean that we wouldn't likely not be meeting in June, we would be, I would do, a motion carry without a motion, without. Not that. We tried waiting, but.
I need a motion to carry Atlantis Group LLC in July.
Second. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The council just sent a letter.
I will, I'll send the confirmed. How you doing, my friend?
I was just sorry you changed your mind.
I didn't, I'm gonna talk to the other.
Did you just get
You
here?
shouldn't have listened to him.
You bring coffee?
Did you just, Starbucks, right? Did you bring something?
We could have been approved, constructed, and I had coffee here. And some chicken nuggets.
There you
There
go.
you go.
There you go.
All right.
Okay, so our next application is 5-2023, Fairfield
Good night,
LLC, Fairfield Land 2 LLC, 635 and 643, 46 block 2001, lot 10 is Bluffview. This is carried from April 23rd, 2024.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, with my fading memory, I believe that the only items that were open, we almost finished at the last hearing, was the issue of having the planner just testify, and you had wanted to hear some operational issues. My engineer addressed the operational issues for the Starbucks operation, and I'm hoping that my planner, thank you, Sri. My planner will be able to address the operational issues for the Raising Cane. So with that, I believe that all of your questions were previously answered. I don't believe there's any outstanding issues at this point, but let my planner testify, and then I'm open for any questions that you may have, and see if we can finish this and get this place operational for the next hearing.
You got it.
So
With
you ready?
that, I called Mr. Gary Dean. I hope he didn't anger any of you at his last application.
Sir, raise your right hand.
Yes.
Do you swear firm testimony about to give before the board is true self you got?
Yes, I do.
For the record, can you state your name?
Gary Dean, Dean. I appeared at the last hearing and was qualified as both a traffic engineer for the application as well as a professional planner.
Your licenses are still?
Yes, it is, Mr. King.
Nothing's changed in the last 15 months?
I renewed both, so we're current through 26, I think.
Not with anything in the last 8 minutes.
Um,
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Board members, in the interest of time, I will go through each of the variances that Mr. Sabo has addressed. As I recall, there were two main issues with the application. The first one, and I'll deal with this one, is the freestanding sign. We had identified, it's an existing sign.
I
That's
might be able to shorten
been there.
this.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
I went out to the site, I stood there under the sign, and I have to agree with you, it isn't too close to the road. So I would rather not have it higher and further back, so where it is, I really don't have an issue at this point.
Okay, I'm very encouraged that we had proposed in deference, even though we thought as you keep moving it back, it becomes less effective. But thank you for that commentary. The second one pertains to the parking stall sizes. And your ordinance requires two things. One, 10 by 20, and hairpin striping. The spaces exist. All of the dimensions have been functioning adequately for years. We would prefer to keep more parking because if we restripe for 10, we lose 12 spaces. However, and here's where I think the advantages come of hairpin striping, and if you're not familiar with it, it's two lines. The space in between the lines is actually slightly narrower, and what it allows for is people to park their cars and have a better target area to be within those lines. Our preference is to do the hairpin striping, but keep them at 9 feet wide. We don't have, shopping carts, and this isn't Home Depot or a supermarket where people have large parcels and bags. So in the interest of having more parking, it's the same blacktop, however you configure it, but the hairpin striping, I think, compensates for it. The 20 feet depth, we will comply with your ordinance standards. So that takes our variances down, and I'll do my best to be as succinct as possible given the hour, and thank you again for your time. That we are seeking relief under your section 4518 for maximum impervious coverage. 55% is allowed. Currently, the site is at 92%. So we are reducing it overall to 59.3. And so that is, I think, a substantial decrease in footprint. It is pre-existing non-conforming. And I think it's a better planning alternative to get rid of all that blacktop, provide more green space, most importantly, provide more flood attenuation, which speaks directly to one of the purposes of zoning, which is to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and certainly we're advancing that purpose of zoning. So I think it is a better alternative, certainly better than the pre-existing condition. For the board members' reference, we actually have two lots. Even though it's one property, that was the Houlihan's and then the banquet facility, it comprises two lots. And so on one lot, we comply actually with the MIC, the impervious. The other one, we're slightly over. But on balance, we're certainly much less than the pre-existing condition. The second relief we're seeking is an unusual one, but your ordinance, same section, 4518, specifies a minimum floor area for each building of 10,000 square feet. I can submit that nobody would build a 10,000 square foot Starbucks. And the balance is obviously, it provides more green space. It allows, again, I think a better civic and arrangement of buildings with smaller buildings, more green space. And we would seek the relief on that again as a superior zoning alternative. In aggregate, again, if we look at both buildings, we're at 5,037 square feet. And again, 10,000 is required. We're seeking relief, and this one I would submit falls under the C1 or hardship category in that your ordinance prescribes a maximum driveway width of 30 feet. All of the aisles on the site, the drive aisles for the parking, all comply. We have a funnel area, if you will, coming off Route 46, and DOT, once we get into the property, our driveway is 52.65 feet. And the reason is we need the wide radii to accommodate delivery trucks safely so that they don't encroach in lanes. I would also submit that, I think it was 2021, DOT built that driveway. They reconstructed Route 46 and the decel lane. And in that process, they created the island, and it funnels down quickly to the prescribed 30 feet. But for highway safety, I would submit that hardship by DOT, and again, it does provide a safer driveway flow, is superior. 4519.5C is parking setback to the side and rear yard. 4 feet is required. We have proposed 3 feet, and again, that is retaining the existing, pre-existing, non-conforming design that was there for decades when Houlihan's. I would say we could comply with relief in the stall depth, but we're abutting another commercial building. I see no major difference in essentially having this much more of a parking setback between commercial sites. So I think in balance, the benefits of that outweigh the detriments. It also makes a better alignment for the shared driveway that leads out and goes past Jose Tejas. And the last bit of relief we need pertains to 4563.2B, which is the maximum wall signs that are permitted. Starbucks complies. Raising Cane's is seeking that relief. And I guess by the narrowest definition of your ordinance, it constitutes a sign. It is actually an art feature. I didn't know this, but apparently Raising Cane's is part of, call it social awareness or marketing. They create a mural on the side of the building that denotes the location of each restaurant. And apparently it's fairly popular among customers to do the selfie and to snap the picture with the pretty mural, and I believe it's a dog or some other motif, but it will prominently say Fairfield, New Jersey on it, so that it becomes, again, awareness of the brand and its location. It brings a little, I'd say, but more recognition to the township. And given that its function is kind of odd, it's not necessarily to advise the traveling public on the road of the use, but it is, again, more of an art installation within the building itself, and that's on the, I believe, the eastern facade. That covers our overall variances. I think, Mr. Mayor, certainly if the board is in agreement, the sign will remain where it is today. We will not change any of the elements relative to height, the area.
That was my opinion. I don't know how the board
Okay.
feels, but.
Fair enough.
That is our preference, by the by.
And beyond that, I know Mr. Pugsley had certain exhibits that depicted an alternate sign location. If the board wants to hear about that.
Mr. Dean, on that list, from Mr. Burry, number 6 was the 12-foot wide driveway. Did you address that?
I'm sorry.
The 12-foot wide driveway under the variances, under Mr. Burry's memo, dated February 6th.
I'm looking at it. I just don't see where.
Number 6?
Here it is. One-way drive aisle, okay. If I read the plan correctly, there is one area of the site. I'm going to have to, Tom, do we have the exhibit from the prior hearing? Thank you. I'll describe it for the board's benefit. The drive aisle is on the south side of Raising Cane, so it is the lane closest, or should I say, between the building and Route 46. Adjacent to that, we have two of the drive-through lanes, and this is the recirculation lane, and that is proposed at 12 feet.
Okay, so.
It is for a limited distance of
Okay, so it's just.
about 5 feet.
It's under the variance list, we would want to include it in the, resolution.
Understood. And
And you want to keep it that way at 12, you're just requesting
Yes.
the variance?
We
because
will
it's,
seek that variance, again, more blacktop for
Rather-
that limited section, given the
That's fine.
infrequency of use.
Final one on there, the dumpster is located in the side, where it's supposed to be in the back, but is that pre-existing?
Yes, I'm gonna keep it there.
Ah, yes. Well, it's for, I assume it's for the Raising Canes, Mr. Burry, and it is to the west side of the building. It is fully enclosed, masonry is screened, I would submit, and it is also flanked by a proposed landscape area. I don't know the treatment of the landscape, but I would say for passing motorists and aesthetics, it will be invisible. And it will be presumably, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, thank you. The drive aisle I was describing is only the very limited section to the west, and I'm pointing. It's the third tree from the west up to the main aisle between Starbucks and Raising Cane. So
Okay.
we need that relief. And I'm now pointing to the dumpster refuse. It is to the east, west of the building, excuse me. There is proposed landscaping if, from Mr. Sabo's input, if you'd like more landscaping to
It would just
fully
have to be
screen that.
listed as a variance.
With that,
Correct. Those are the relief that were needed.
And you'll comply with everything else in Mr. Berry's.
That is correct.
and we believe, you have heard everything, I believe. I would ask, unless there's any questions, which we're prepared to have everybody here, we're prepared to ask for a vote so that we can, maybe at the next hearing, I'm here, I can bring coffee for everybody.
Do we have any questions from the board?
This is a good plan.
Any questions from the public? Seeing no one? Give us your closing statement.
Is anyone for or against the, anyone here for or against the project? No, seeing none.
My summary is, this is a good plan. The board realizes it's a good use. I ask for a vote of approval, please. And we need Starbucks. That means I need somebody to make a resolution.
Make a motion.
How about I make a motion?
No, make the
Approval.
motion.
Go ahead, you got it?
I got the variances listed. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a resolution for, a motion.
It's late.
It's late, you know.
No, I know, you didn't get coffee.
Yeah, no, I would have had my frappuccino by now. With the following variances as listed, do you have them?
Yes.
You want them?
I have it.
Okay. With the variances that were listed with the impervious, you have them, so as listed. I'll make a motion for approval. The application is in, on a site that certainly can look forward to an improvement.
I'll second.
I just want to check, Nate, were you were here the last meeting for when they started? It was just Kingsbridge
was
that, okay.
I heard him.
Mayor Galise,
Aye.
Mr. Gasparini.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Moreno.
Aye.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Cafone.
Aye.
More importantly, despite the fact that I had to stand up about 20 times and walk around tonight, and I wasn't first, I appreciate you hearing us tonight. It was a nice thing to do. It was appreciated.
It was a good application, it's a good spot. I'm sure you'll be very successful there.
No,
Many people like
but-
Starbucks, I've never
but
had
you made
Raising
it-
Cane.
you-
Wait for that chicken. Who's the chicken people out there?
Listen, it's a really good product.
You brought your whole fan club with you? It's cheering you on?
One never knows these
Them Frappuccino machines going.
Real quick,
One never knows.
before we close, we have approval of the bills. We have a Inglesino bill, and we have a Bowman bill.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Motion.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Yes.